I'll turn it on. Check 1, 2.
So is there? Will we see? Oh, it will be
Yes.
when you're ready.
Good morning, all. Excuse me. It is Wednesday, May 3rd. Do you realize how tentative I am about saying what day it is since that last experience? I'm like, is it really Wednesday? Wednesday, May 3rd at 9:06 a.m., and we are reconvening. I will simply share with the room because I can't be sure that a lot of you have been, that every single one of you has been in one of our hearings before. Just look for the exit nearest you, and if you hear an emergency sound, go to that exit, and then go down, and we meet in the Cesar Chavez Park at the corner of 10th and J if you want to be with us. If there is an emergency and then there is an all clear, you'll know when the all clear happens. And if you need assistance, somebody will escort you to a protected area. The other thing to remember is that this is webcast and recorded, and I suspect a lot of people are listening. So please speak into the microphone closely enough that it gets picked up. We may be able to hear you fine, but we want to make sure that folks on the webcast do as well, and appreciate you just not getting so close that it creates kind of a popping sound. So it's kind of, there's an art to it, but hopefully that will be a problem, and folks will assist you if you're speaking too softly or the microphone's too far away. Also, if you have phones or other sound-making devices, please set them to silent. And then finally, with me today are, to my left, Vice Chair Stephen Moore; to his left, Board Member Didi D'Adamo; to my right, Board Member Tam Dodek; and to her right, Board Member Joaquin Esquivel. Mr. Howard, do you want to mention the staff or introduce the staff that's assisting today?
Yes, thank you. To my left, Chief Counsel Michael Laufer. To my right, Chief Deputy John Bishop. Eric Oppenheimer is testifying in the legislature today on conservation trailer bill language at the budget hearing. And assisting the board today are Janine Townsend and Courtney Tyler.
Thank you very much. We deferred board member reports to today. I'm going to suggest we do it at the end. And then we do have a closed session, a personnel session that we will have before we adjourn. Thank you. Before we adjourn formally. And with that, I think we are on to item number 8. The early part of item number 8 is a series of speakers. First, Dr. Stephen Weisberg, then Lara Phelps from US EPA, then Christine Sotelo will do the staff report, and then we have 10 minutes each, David Kimbrough for 10 minutes, Debbie Webster and Stephen Clark for 10 minutes, and then Bruce Godfrey for 10 minutes, and then Darren Polimas, the head of the Division of Drinking Water, will wrap up at 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, and then we will go to public comment. Dr. Weisberg, nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. I have a PowerPoint.
Sure.
There it is. So as a starting point, the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program moved from the Department of Health to the State Water Board in 2014. And shortly thereafter, the State Board staff asked to do an external review of the program to see what they were inheriting. My organization, the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, SWRCB, was asked to facilitate that review. We were not on the review panel. We were simply the people who brought together the review panel and made sure the review panel got the appropriate information. We were supported in that process by a stakeholder advisory committee. That committee helped us with panel member selection, helped us identify the charge questions, and then helped us develop the agenda so that the panel members were hearing from a wide array of opinions from within the community. We're very fortunate to get essentially the A-list of panel members. There are 4 of them that are listed on your screen there. One, the chair, Laura Phelps, basically is the person who heads up laboratory accreditation processes for US EPA. Dr. Jordan Adelson is the person who heads up laboratory accreditation processes for the Navy. Steve Arms, he is now retired, but he was the former head of Florida's equivalent of ELAP and one of the more successful state-run programs in the country. And then David Spies was the former president of one of the largest laboratories that's not doing business in California. I think Dave told me that he is actually, his lab was accredited, I think, 14 other states, so he's had a chance to see accreditation being done by a variety of groups. We had a 5th panel member who worked for us for the first part of the program, but she began doing business in California earlier this year, and so she recused herself from the rest of the panel participation because we wanted people who were not affected by the outcomes, not living in California, not doing business in California. The panel process was a two-part review process, something we've done for you, SWRCB has done for you in the past, where the idea is that you come in and do the initial review to kind of assess the status of the program, and then come back a year and a half or 2 years later and see, has the program responded to the changes? It's a way of ensuring that the panel report doesn't just sit on a shelf, but is actually acted upon. And it doesn't mean that the program will in fact do everything that the panel suggests. They may find that as they're in the process, they find they may want to do some things differently, or they may find challenges in implementing some of those recommendations. But it does ensure that there's at least dialogue about have they taken the panel recommendations seriously. So the first part of the process took place in 2015. The panel held 3 in-person meetings to receive input from the community, and then put out a final report, and they gave a verbal presentation to this group, I guess actually without the benefit of our newest board member. They did that, I think, in November of 2015. They have since come back and done this review. They had a full day meeting to answer questions of, has the program taken the appropriate steps to resolve the challenges? Have they responded to the kinds of things that the panel identified? And that is the report that you will hear about today. And so with that, let me introduce Laura Phelps from US EPA, who is the chair of that panel.
Thank you, Steve. And it's an honor to be with all of you again today. And on behalf of the panel members, I want to thank you all for the response that we've even seen from each of you since we were here last year in November. And we certainly appreciate the opportunity to have gone on this journey with all of you to see if we can get things going back in a good direction. Thank you. I'd like to start off by just acknowledging and thanking a bunch of people who really made this happen. All of you have helped make this happen, certainly in putting the panel together in the first place and having the evaluation. But Christine and her entire staff have just been incredibly wonderful to work with and really down to earth and honest about where everything was. And without that frankness, this wouldn't have worked. That being said, I want to thank your laboratory community as a whole, because without the frankness of the rest of the people who are in this room or on the webcast, or that you may even hear from later this afternoon, we wouldn't have been able to make as honest of an evaluation as we did either. So everybody has just been great in this process in giving us that opportunity to ensure that we got the best information we could possibly have in making a true evaluation of the status and the state of laboratory accreditation here. And I would be without remorse if I didn't thank Steve for everything that he's done to get us together from start to finish in pulling all the pieces together and helping to orchestrate all of that, which has made things a lot easier for us. So thank you. All that being said, I am here to brief you on our final report that came out. I'm sure that y'all have probably seen a copy. I have one here if you need one for reference today at all. But I just want to kind of walk through that report with you today and just quickly highlight the report in itself as far as the executive summary goes, our assessment of the program, our further recommendations, and then just wrap up from there. So in the executive summary, I'm sure that you saw that we really do think significant progress has been made, but California's ELAP is still not quite meeting its programmatic objectives. There's still some work to be done. And in our assessment, to be fair, in what they have significantly done is they've worked on regaining their credibility with all of the stakeholders that they interact with on a regular basis. They have been working toward an accreditation process and putting a system in place. They have created organizational units to help ensure laboratory competency can be achieved. But we still have 2 recommendations to follow up with at this point. And that is, we really need to adopt an accreditation standard to effectively be able to move forward. And we really need, unfortunately, it's always, am I not pointing at the right thing? Oh, expand the resources for the program. I know resources are always an issue, but we mean that in several different ways, which I think you'll see in the presentation. It's not just about money. What should I be pointing at? Oh, it's okay. I just wanted to make sure I was pointing at the right thing. We actually showed this slide to you when we came in November of 2015. And that was to say, that the credibility of this program didn't exist, quite frankly. They didn't have the respect of their clients. They didn't have the respect of the laboratories. They didn't have respect from the other states. And that said a lot as to why the program had gotten to where it was. Specifically included this slide today because we wanted to create an updated version of it. Maybe. Is that they truly are establishing their credibility with their clients, the laboratories, and the other states. They have been meeting regularly with all of these communities. They've recreated some of the working groups that they've had in the past in LTAC, in the getting advice. So they're developing those relationships. They're getting past the gotcha mentality of we're not trying to put you out of business. We're not trying to tell you that you're doing a bad job. We're trying to create a system and a process that's a fair evaluation for everybody. So I really think that they have come a long way with this single slide even since we saw you about 1.5 years ago. As far as our assessment goes, I would have to say that we felt their infrastructure was probably the part that had changed the most since we were here before. They have adopted a management system, and they have been working very hard to put that into place and all the components of it so that the staff and everyone knows what's expected of them and what they're doing. They have redone their organizational structure in creating 3 very specific units or groups. That's a program development, research and enforcement unit, a proficiency testing unit, and then an on-site assessment unit. As I mentioned, their staff actually do have expectations now of what it is that's expected of them, what they're supposed to do. They have performance metrics, if you will, in which to achieve. They are operating under a management system and have put a quality assurance management system in place so that they know how things talk to each other, how they operate, and things of that nature. So that's a huge improvement from where they were before when they didn't have that structure in place. They've also adopted a communication plan and a communication system for how they're working and interacting with their stakeholders. They both have meetings. As I mentioned, they recreated LTAC to ensure that they were operating effectively with the technical support that they could get from the community and the program. They have created a newsletter, which has been a little bit slow about getting off the ground consistently, but they're working towards that. They've now issued 2. They had only issued 1 when we first got here, but they have issued 2 since we evaluated the program. They've put a lot more information on their website. And one huge compliment that I think that we heard repeatedly, quite frankly, from some of the laboratories and everything, is that you can actually get someone on the phone. You can actually get a call back. You can actually get an email back. They actually do communicate and interact with people who have questions and issues that they want to hear about. So I thought that was a huge compliment to where they had been. The second part of our assessment also really dovetails quite nicely into our recommendations, quite frankly. And that is regarding the standards decision, which I think you may recall was a very big deal in our first report of something that was critically important to be done. And I would just say immediately, congratulations to what they have done. I mean, we truly applaud the fact it's not working. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Oh, So, so congratulations.
Got that going for us, yeah.
So they have selected a standard. They've gone through a very lengthy process to get there, but we truly applaud the fact that they did everything that they could to include all of their stakeholders in that process, hear from both the laboratory communities as well as their clients about being inclusive in this process and ensuring that they took into account all of the issues and the concerns that the community had as a whole, and that it was going to meet their ultimate client needs once they, went forward. I'm never going to do a PowerPoint like this again. It is critical, however, for them to now adopt that standard. There's a very critical and crucial difference between picking and identifying a standard and actually putting it into place and practice. So adopting it is something that needs to have happened yesterday if it could, but does need to happen as efficiently as it possibly can now at this point. An implementation strategy for how that's going to be rolled out will be critical for ensuring that it does meet all of their clients and their customer needs. All of the laboratories will have needs in getting up to speed and getting there, and all of their clients will have needs as well in ensuring that that process and that program is in place for properly evaluating them in the first place. So not adopting the standard at this point, which we understand could even take a year in the process and in processing it even at this point if they started now, is continued ineffectiveness in what they're doing because they still don't have that critical component in place to be able to follow and be able to hold people accountable to without it actually being adopted. Maybe I should just say next slide. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. The standard was actually selected with a proposed 58 items to be modified. We've actually taken a look at those 58 items, and we don't feel like they need modification. They need clarification, if you will.
So you're not saying drop them, you're saying
We're not
put
saying
them in a different form.
Exactly. Put them in a different form. Don't just create a different standard in itself when you don't have to, because you're going to isolate yourself by doing that.
Because other folks in other states are going to then feel like they have to go through the whole,
Well,
they're going to wonder what this beast is.
a lot of people will wonder that. It will actually negate the ability to have some reciprocity or some back and forth with some other states. I mean, if you do look at other states that have adopted a single standard that has been, vetted, quite frankly, for years among states and laboratories in itself, it will kind of create the Lone Ranger effect, if you will, if you make a modification to it versus just truly understanding and clarifying those 58 items. And I have to say that I think that it's a matter of truly just getting to know the program a bit better, truly understanding and having the education that hasn't been offered yet, quite frankly. I mean, once you have the training and education and clarification of those items, I don't think that they present necessarily a barrier or a problem that someone might react to in being less familiar with some of those items. So,
And were these 58 items developed with stakeholders then? So are these were identified from the laboratory community? These aren't necessarily staff looking at the standard and saying,
that is correct. These were all developed by the stakeholder community in itself. They were not developed by ELAP. ELAP has taken a look at them, and that's actually how they distilled them down to the 58 list that they were willing to have further conversation about. But it doesn't mean that you have to modify your standard to actually achieve addressing those items.
And do staff currently feel that see these 58 items as modifications, or do they agree that they can be just simply clarifications and not a modification to the standard?
I think you'll hear from Christine shortly that they understand our assessment of those 58 items really being things that can be clarified and addressed through training and things like that without having to change the standard. Okay.
And thanks, Board Member Esquivel. I had similar questions. I'd like to go ahead and then ask you from your perspective as a member of the expert panel and with national perspective, working with other states, were these type of clarifications implemented in other states to address the challenges with smaller operations with, 1 to 3 people in a lab?
Other states have found that that even having 1 to 3 people in a lab can still comply with the standard without having these modifications made to the standard. They've been educated and they've learned what they mean and when they do apply to their program and when they do not. I mean, that's another component of this is that sometimes there's a clause within, some of these items that they may not even apply to your lab at all, depending on what type of work or what type of analysis you're even doing. So there are, other state programs that are in place that have effectively been able to accredit their very small labs that are 1 to 3 people and comply with the standard without these modifications being made. So implementation, as I mentioned, is what we think is critical here, in that it's imperative to make sure that you help the laboratories make this transition because it's different. It's not necessarily what they did before, and it's why some of these clarifications, need to be made. Time is of the essence, however, as I said, in getting this entire program on track. It's not been operating with an effective standard in place for years. And even in our findings from the very first report, we emphasized then how important it was to adopt an accreditation standard so that you could move forward. So we're echoing that again this time, is to say you did go through a lengthy process to ensure that you took into account your stakeholders' questions and concerns, but now you really need to take the steps necessary to adopt this standard and move yourselves forward. And so in doing that and having an implementation plan and schedule and setting reasonable expectations, we believe that can be a win-win for everyone. But guidance and training, once again, is what gets you past those 58 items, if you will, because your clients need that education and training, your laboratories need that education and training, and the staff, the assessors themselves, need that education and training. So ensuring that those tools are available will be extremely helpful. And I want to start off by saying thank you to all of you for making an incredible training contract happen for the staff at ELAPN itself. It's top-notch without a question, but at the same time, I hope you all understand that because the standard hasn't been adopted yet, there's going to be some benefit that's negated from this being in place right now, because they're not being trained to exactly what's going to be in place until they get it into place. So that's just a component that I want to ensure that you understand, but what you have put into place is incredible and will serve them very, very well in moving forward, and already has, I believe.
So just tying this to the previous questions about the smaller labs and your response that there might be some provisions that wouldn't necessarily apply to the smaller labs, is it your opinion that it would be easy enough through a transition program to make it clear, sort of a one-size-fits-all for the smaller labs, to explain to them in an easy way what applies, what doesn't apply?
Absolutely, and I actually quite frankly believe that some of the smaller labs that just do 1 or 2 different types of analysis could have a training session tailored to them that took 1 day, and that they would walk away in 1 day, 2 at the very most, and have everything that they needed to operate under an accreditation standard.
Thank you.
So I do believe that there's a very effective way to ensure that they have everything they need.
Okay.
Okay. Part of our recommendation now in regards to resources is that there is more help that's critically needed to keep moving forward, and we're recommending the use of a third party, some tools that can be adopted and or purchased for the program to help them consistently and effectively operate, and then them having some accountability even to all of you and having metrics that they're going to work on achieving. So in regards to third party, it's really critical that they eliminate their backlog, especially to non-drinking water programs. That hasn't gone away since, and that's part of the reason that they're not meeting their programmatic goals at this point. They do not necessarily have the full diversity of expertise that's needed to meet all of their clients' needs, nor is it necessarily practical for them to keep that large of a diversity, if you will, on staff when there may be only one or two labs that need certain types of evaluation, if you know what I mean. So this is a very effective means in being able to do that and to achieving that. So the consequence of not using third parties at this point is another increase in fees because you don't have as many staff as you'll need to meet the diversification of the client's needs at this point in time. And I think that in itself would be
Well, it's just the classic backlog issue that you bring in a third party to deal with your backlog as opposed to growing your permanent staff to fit a size that's not going to be your consistent size.
In regards to tools, there's an incredible amount of software that's available off the shelf, if you will, that would need to be tailored a little bit to your program, and that's easily done because that's the way the software was designed, quite frankly. But being able to have this software could actually help with the total management of the accreditation process, help relieve a little bit of staff time to be doing other things, if you will, and ensure that that's handled consistently. There's also software that's available for the management of proficiency testing that once again could help alleviate some staff time there and to ensure that that's handled consistently and properly every time. And so we do highly recommend that these software tools be purchased. I think that they're already looking into what those are, and I'm sure you'll hear from Christine about where they are in that process. But them having the ability to purchase these would certainly more effectively use the staff that they have. In regards to future considerations, it really is critical that first and foremost, the fundamentals of the program in getting up and operational and establishing metrics for accountability are addressed first. You have to walk before you run, and there's no reason to get caught in a traffic circle, as I even put at the bottom of the screen, and have yourself going in too many directions. There's a lot of further expansion that's been considered in making this the state-of-the-art program for everyone to look up to, and I think that you can get there, but without making that fundamental transition first and getting your foundation underneath your feet, I think it would be a mistake, and the panel believes it would be a mistake to just leap into these other areas and these other tentacles, if you will, until that takes place. But we're not saying not to go there. We're saying to consider that in the future. Once you do get that foundation built, think about having a future panel, think about having another group come in and help point you down that path and in that direction, but don't quite go there yet. So to just summarize quickly, we really do believe that even though ELAP isn't achieving its mission quite yet, that they're on the path to get there. And they've certainly taken a lot of great steps and have the energy to persevere and get themselves to that point, which I think is critical in itself. There's a great group of people that's working together. They just need a few more of them to help them get there. It's critical that they have your support, because without your support, there's a lot of time that's going to be taken and a lot of resources that they don't quite have at their fingertips yet that they need. And so they're going to need your support to help them get to that finish line and get to that foundation that they're trying to build. We think they are regaining their credibility. I think it's a testament in itself when you have your clients saying how refreshing it is that you get a phone call back, that you get an email back, and that you have that connection with them that you didn't have for so many years, that you can actually have your clients meet with you on a day-to-day basis when 2 years ago you didn't even know their names. That's come a long way. And so I do believe that they're working on getting there. And they're working toward an accreditation process, but not adopting the standard yet is really a barrier to taking that next leap. And that's the biggest thing that really needs to happen next. And so I think that they truly are working to ensure that you've got data of known and documented quality that you can support and that are going to give you the answers that you need to make fundamental decisions for the state of California and feel quite safe and secure about what they are. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any further questions you have.
Great. Let's turn to questions. You all will be able to stay through the meeting, because I'm pretty sure we'll have questions after hearing
Absolutely.
from everyone. Well, thank you for your encouragement and yet your candor at the same time.
Perhaps staff is going to mention this, but I was curious, John or anyone could describe what our process would be for adopting the standard. What is envisioned in terms of, is it a board action? Would it be on our agenda at some point to seal the deal?
Yes, ultimately we come to the board for a board action to adopt the standard consistent with the applicable laws. So this would not be something done down within the ELAB program itself.
And I certainly hear the message about the need to reach a milestone in that area. But isn't it true that, as you mentioned, by selecting a standard, a framework, a system, and with our staff aware of that system, we can get things structurally underway before the standard is formally adopted?
I think as long as you can have some assurance that you're going to get to that point without it getting modified somewhere along the way or changed from what's proposed, I think that that's the critical piece in itself, is knowing exactly what is going to be adopted and get through your process for adopting it, if that makes sense. I mean, you know, 'cause
one of the benefits that I've heard from staff is resources are available, training, even
Yes.
maybe funding, perhaps, if this standard is adopted. Are those resources not so much available to us and stakeholders until the standard is adopted?
No, they'd be available. They're available to you today, and I think that there's been a lot of resources that have been tapped to try to help with that educational process even now. So, and there's been a lot of assurance from many folks that they're more than happy to step up to the plate and help anytime.
Well, thank you.
Welcome.
So beyond necessarily the stakeholder sort of input that staff was looking to have, what do you feel was the real delay at this point in adopting a standard, if it's really kind of about selecting, feeling comfortable with one, and not trying to modify it too much? So do you have any sort of thoughts around that?
So I think that it took a long time to have all those conversations with the stakeholders and talk through the process to get to the point that it was, we've chosen a standard and we've got 58 modifications that we want to see happen. And now I think the issue is, do you make 58 modifications, which means you create your own standard, you become your own Lone Ranger, if you will, and you know, you tweak the standard beyond having that reciprocity and interaction with other states. You tweak it beyond having available training resources that you could pull off the shelf today. So you change a lot of things when that happens. So making the decision that you're going to adopt that standard and then take those 58 items and provide that clarification, provide that training, helping people you get through those items, that's the difference at this point.
What do you think is a realistic and or ideal timeline for the adoption of the standard from this point?
So not knowing all the ins and outs of your legislative process, that's what we've heard could take,
I don't understand
about a
why it would
year.
take- Why a year?
I don't know. I mean, that's just what we've been told at this point.
All right, we've got 2 counselors here.
We need an engineer, right?
Yeah, we need an engineer.
Part of the issue is going through the Administrative Procedures Act, and that takes time, putting the
So we
document.
have this workshop, and then we start the process. Oh, my.
So the
Okay.
process, you know, essentially for the laboratory standards, we have those. We put them together and put it out for comment, but we have other changes too that need to be made to the regulations. And so we are working on putting that text together also. And Christine will talk about the timing later, but we're hopeful by this summer being able to put that package out later in the summer, and then get public comment on it. And the process, as you know, it just takes time for developing regulations and getting them through the process.
Can you talk? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I just, I was, well.
No, you go
real quick.
ahead. That's fine. You may
The-
ask the question better than I would.
It may really, I'm going on, we received a lot of comments, in October and then again this time around. And so we talked a bit about the standard, which was a lot of comments on that. Another comment area was the third-party issue. And just from a nationwide perspective in other states, is it fairly common or is it universal that similar programs, accreditation programs in other states take advantage of third-party resources, and that it's a money saver as opposed to an additional expense? Because that was a concern expressed in the comments.
Sure, and I believe that there are a couple labs here that can speak to that from having that exact experience even. But there are quite a few states that have taken advantage of that. There are some states that actually exclusively do that. There are some programs that exclusively do that. But there are some that have continued to try to do it themselves. And so I think that you would find that they're both out there, but the ones that have taken advantage of it have actually been a little bit relieved. And the state of Florida is an example of one of the states that used to do it completely themselves, and then they made that switch, if you will, and that has worked well for them.
And I guess to the point of expense or cost of adding the third-party element, would Florida say it's cost neutral or maybe even became more efficient and got more work done for less money?
I think that they would. And I think that the argument would be is who you're paying the money to, and depending on how people account for that within their laboratory network, I think that probably makes a difference as to how they'll see that from their accounting standpoint. But I do believe that people have had very positive experiences. And I think that the double-edged sword that some people feel like is there, if you will, is that the state itself usually retains the right to actually make the review and issue the certificate, if you will. So even though the third party has done the exercise of doing the assessment and everything else. And so I think the fear is that setting up a system that you're going to have to pay the state a fee regardless to give you that certification, versus then you've got to pay this third party to come in and do the whole evaluation and everything, that in itself is going to cost more. But I think you have to almost set it up as like a driver's license situation, is that, you have to pay a fee to get your driver's license, you have to pay a fee to get your accreditation certificate, and ensuring that those numbers make sense. And I'm sensitive to the fact that I'm sure that California feels like the expense has been enormous just because of the catch-up that they've had to do to their fees in itself, because of not necessarily being at the level they needed to be at for years. Yeah. So I'm sure right now anything is going to seem very expensive. So
Thanks for that.
you're welcome.
I know, and then I'll get yet another one. I mean, I'm sure we'll hear from quite a few people we have in the comments, but you do have a room full of people behind you, many of whom it's like the initial shock anybody has when they're regulated from any entity. It's been interesting how much of it is common to what we hear. But you also have folks who spend a lot of time, where staff spend a lot of time actually trying to listen and coming up with the 58 modifications to kind of do what we had asked them to do, because it seemed like a good idea at the time. And then you all came back, and rightly so, you're the experts. So for me, there's an enormous thumb on the scale for what you all are recommending, because I'm desperate for us to get our credibility back and to not, there are areas where California leads the nation, and we're very quick to tell you what they are. There are more issues than this where we're not, and that troubles me. So I like the way you framed it. We're not going to get, we have the potential to be the head of the pack on this too, but right now let's just take care of basics. But you all came in and made a different recommendation to say that of the 58, 56 of them you really can't handle as clarifications, and it would be, not that they're irrelevant, but that they're really not a change to the standard. You've explained why it's really in our interest to stick with the standard. But just for the folks behind you who don't seem to quite understand that, some of them, others do, can you just explain again, are the other two that are remaining okay in terms of the overall view of how we would be viewed if we adopt the TNI with those two modifications? And then can you just elaborate, both of you, really a little bit on maybe an example of one of them that is really just a clarification, and how that would be, why we can still be responsive to the conversations that were happening, they just don't need to be in the standard.
Sure. And
Sorry,
I
it took
should,
more words to say that.
no,
than
that's okay.
necessary.
And I think that, to your point even, one of the things that's really great about going through this process and even taking the 56 in clarifications is that this conversation can happen at a national level. It doesn't have to happen just in the one-on-one training that then takes place within the state of California. Because if you do embrace a national standard and become a part of that community in itself,
Well, that's a good point.
California can step up to the table. Any of the labs can step up to the table. You don't even have to be a member of that community or organization to say, I find the wording of this particular item, not easy to understand, and I would like for it to be clarified. And there may be a whole room full of people like this that agree across the entire United States, and that becomes a permanent modification to the standard itself. So, so the 58 items that have been identified, and even quite frankly, one of the two that will be addressed is actually now becoming a national conversation about whether or not it needs to be modified in that national standard to be moved ahead and move forward differently to meet the needs of more programs. So I should offer that as well. It's not just a matter of clarification and or making the laboratories ensure that they understand the item as it is written. It can be changed because they may not be the only ones that find it a little bit complicated as it's worded, or find it complicated to implement as it's worded or issued. So I should say that as well. But I do actually...
You're appealing to our pride of leadership, but right now I'm trying to appeal to our pride of not being the laggard, or our fear of being the laggard. I don't know what
So you
the-
asked for specific examples, so let me see if I can
Some
give you the
specific
context.
examples, and sort of just so I really understand it, if it's a clarification, if the language is perhaps vague, and that's why we wanted the clarification, we can still be adopting the national standard and saying in our own clarification, this is how we read that vague thing. So we can get the same benefit that all of that stakeholder engagement called for.
Well, let me give you two specific examples that are at the extremes. So
Yeah, extremes are more helpful to,
One
Could you bring your mic a little further so the
I'm sorry,
web folks can hear?
One
Thank
of
you.
the extremes at the,
Thank you.
which is one of the two that the panel is suggesting does need a modification, is the education requirements of the lab directors. So those are very specifically called out in the T&I standard. California has its own process that it's used, and the people in California feel that that process is working well, and quite frankly, the panel agrees. And so what they're saying is you should make a modification to accept this standard. And as Laura says, there is the opportunity for discussion about how you might, in fact, change the national standard because there's some things in the California requirements that are better. At the other extreme, there were a couple of places in the T&I standard where it says, for example. So from a data analysis perspective, it says, for example. And some of the things that the laboratory community was suggesting is, we don't like that example. And if it's in there as a standard, then we might be held to doing that type of data analysis where we don't think that's necessarily correct. And as Laura says, that can be a clarification that that is simply an example that is being required. So there are a lot of ones obviously in between.
Yeah,
the
no,
two.
that wouldn't be a standard issue. That's a now I get it. Okay.
Right. So those are kind of the extremes. There are obviously some that are in the middle that will be maybe a little bit more contentious, but I think the panel looked at those and said, really, there's only two that are critical.
And there's some that even say, you know, if you're doing the following, well, if you're not doing the following, then it doesn't matter. You're not going to be held to that, you know. So that was going to be the other example that I gave, is that some of them are only if you're doing certain types of analysis, and everybody's not going to be doing that.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll have more. Thank you for the time you've put into it. We'll move to the next panel and then come back. Thanks. I don't want to ask you every question that might even be answered if we go through the other panels and then get to public comment. All right, next will be the Christine Sotelo. It's 30 minutes on the timer. So far, folks are going faster than their times. That's always nice.
So good morning, board members, Chair Marcus, and Vice Chair Steve Moore. So I'm Christine Sotelo, the Program Manager for California ELAP, and I'm here with the team. I have Kimberly Niemeyer from the Office of Chief Counsel, and I also have Darren Polhamus, who's the Deputy Director of the Division of Drinking Water. All right, so we're here to give you our perspective and our approach to the panel's Year 2 final recommendations. All right, so you heard from Laura that we're making significant progress, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank the staff here at the panel table and also the staff up against the wall over here on the left. We've made significant progress, and we're radically different than we were when we moved over in 2014. So I'm really proud of them. But as you heard from Laura, that although we're making significant progress, we're still not all the way there. So we accept the panel's assessment of ELAP, and we accept their recommendation. So my presentation today is going to walk you through our response. So one primary thing that you need to know, what exactly does she mean about us not meeting our mission and our mandate? So let me illustrate that for you. So this is ELAP's on-site assessment backlog. And as you can see, we're behind. We inherited a backlog when we moved over from our previous agency. So it's a lot better than it was last year. So you should be happy about that. But we're just not able to achieve addressing all of our on-site assessments every 2 years that's required. So the first two recommendations that the panel have, we'll talk about our approach to addressing this backlog. So you heard Laura talk about how we're just stuck 20 years ago. We don't have the latest technology like other programs in the nation and also other programs within the Water Board. So we are working with the Division of Information Technology to help get us there. They help with all programs within the board. You also heard from Laura that...
Can we just go back just so
Sure.
people understand who may not understand what this is? So developing the business requirements is the first step before you can procure software.
Sure.
Right. I'm not sure everybody understands that.
Yeah, so the Division of Information Technology needs to understand how your program is operating, so an as-is process. And so now we're developing what our ideal business requirements are to fulfill our regulatory and statutory requirements. So they're actively working.
And
with
why
us
do you
on
need
that.
to do that rather than being able to get something off the shelf that other agencies routinely use that do TNI?
Yeah, so that is a mandatory requirement for any technology, and maybe Darren can step in.
Yeah, we very well may end up with an off-the-shelf software. That may, as a result of the evaluation, be the recommendation. So it's not necessary. It includes looking at existing software or custom and weighs
All
out the
right,
cost
so it's
benefits.
not
and
trying to
so,
do a
no.
customized thing. It's trying to make sure that our information technology people understand what you need so they can assist in the decision about whether to procure off-the-shelf or customized software.
Correct,
So you're
yes.
doing that early.
Yes.
That's good.
And what's currently the timeline of kind of completing some of that work and analysis?
So we've talked to our Division of Information Technology and hopefully later this year, but it's really hard to say. There's a lot of steps that have to be worked out.
So this all goes through a very large bureaucratic process, and
Well,
we
I
can't.
know some of it comes out of other agency
Comes out of
issues that happened a number of years ago.
Yes, and so this
It's bad, but
we can't spend any money on IT until we've done this stage one analysis and had it approved, and so that's the first step, and that has to be done before we can do the next step.
All right, so you heard from Laura that we don't have a proficiency testing database or software, and it's really just hamstringing the program. My staff manually review tens and thousands of lines of data, where other agencies within other states' lab accreditation programs, they have a database to do it. So we've done some preliminary research, and you've heard from Darren, there are things off the shelf, and we're also examining with DIT for in-house solutions, but we are very optimistic that Division of Information Technology will be able to help us with that. So the next panel recommendation is that we accept third-party assessments to reduce our backlog. So you just heard about the problems we're having with technology, and so technology alone is not going to help us. So we accept the panel's recommendation for third party. You remember that backlog, so it's really critical. You probably have read some letters that were submitted, and what we've heard from listening sessions and from the lab community, that we need to get this right. We need to make it fair. And so there's a lot of details that play into making third-party assessments work. So before we let you know what our proposed approach will be, we want to put forth some principles first so that we have a baseline, so that we know that we can do this the right way and a fair way. So first, we want to make third-party assessments optional. We don't want to be the roadblock. If a lab wants to use third parties so that they can get it done faster, we want it to be optional. And you will likely hear later today about fees potentially increasing from third-party assessments. We want to make it relatively cost neutral for the laboratories if they decide to use it. And we'd also like to have a trial period to examine whether or not it's working for us and the laboratories and to get through that backlog that we have. So our approach would be that laboratories can hire third-party assessors, and they would choose from a list of approved firms that meet a set of standards for third-party assessors. And we're also not giving away the program. They would simply request an on-site assessment from the third party, and we would review it, see that they've addressed the corrective actions, and we would make the decision on accreditation. And we would continue to enforce laboratories. We would continue to review the proficiency testing results. So we're not giving away the program. Yeah, I don't know. So next, I talked to you a little bit about optional. So again, we don't want to be the roadblock. There are labs that are on our backlog list that have to wait up to a year to get accreditation from ELAP. So if it's available to them, we want them to be able to use it. And you've heard the testimony from Laura and the panel. We just don't have the technical expertise. So a lot of laboratories see those on-site assessments as a great learning experience and knowledge base to get their laboratories up to speed. So we want to make that optional. However, the caveat is to the extent possible. So I just mentioned we don't have the skill set needed to do the assessments. So we've done an analysis and we think some of these fields of testing and methods, we just don't have the qualifications of our staff and enough qualified staff to do this. The rest we can do, but for some of these we can't. And then back to the cost neutrality. We really hear what the laboratories are saying, and we hear what they're saying, that they don't want their fees to go up. And so we would like to design and make it so that they pay a lesser fee if they get an assessment not from us, but from an outside third party. And so that is what we would like to do for the laboratories. So the final recommendation you heard from Laura is that we need to immediately adopt and develop an implementation approach to help laboratories to implement the TNI standard. So you heard a lot about it with your conversation from Laura, and so we're listening. You know that we left the October 6th workshop and we knew that we needed to move forward with the standard, and the standard is the base of our program. Everything flows through the standard and it affects everyone. So we just really need to get that done to move forward and make the program a better program. So here's our timeline for adoption. We're ready to draft the language for the regulations, and we are scheduling workshops this summer. We've got a comments email box that we've already been getting a lot of comments from the lab community. For those that can't make it to any of the workshops, this is a great way for them to submit comments. We've updated our website so that we'll let everyone know what we're doing with our draft regulations. So we anticipate that you will see the draft regulations in front of you sometime in the spring of 2018. So here's the graphic that you saw last October. It's our regulations readiness level. When you saw us last October, we were at 4, selecting a standard. So we selected one, and now we're ready to draft the regulations text. So I want everyone to know that 5 through 12, there's going to be a lot of stakeholder input, and so we're going to be
There'll be a lot of
interacting,
output too, I'm
with
sure.
all of the community. All right, so we've been listening to what the labs have been saying to us. We've been reading the letters and interacting with our LTAC. And what we know is that they would like some help, and we're committed to doing that. So we've developed a 3-strategy implementation assistance. So it's time until the laboratories are held to the standard, so delayed implementation. It's the tools that they need to lessen the burden that you will probably hear later today that is just overwhelming for them. And then the trainings that they need to educate their staff to be successful. So let me touch on each one of these. So the timing. What we're proposing is a 3-phased implementation. So we would like to train the laboratories so they can succeed. We want them to implement the standard, but they wouldn't be held to the standard. And then in 2022, 5 years from now, they would be held to the standard and have to comply. And so that spans about 6 years, and they would have some practice assessments to learn the standard. So this gives them considerable time to learn, to implement, and then be enforced by the standard. So the next thing that we've heard from laboratories is that they need the tools to succeed. We don't want them to fail. We want them to get everything they need so that they can have the up to par laboratory that we expect in California. And so we've talked to TNI on behalf of them, and they will give California Labs a free 6-month membership to TNI, which will allow them to have all of these tools to help them succeed. And next is the training. We're going to provide free training to laboratories so they can ask questions. We've already done 2 last year in Northern and Southern California, and we plan to do more so that the labs can ask questions, they can clarify any misunderstandings in the standard, and they will also have those 2 training assessments that I talked to you about earlier. And so the small laboratories, we've heard what they have been saying, and they're fearful of the standard. It's something new to them. You heard from Laura. But the good thing about TNI is that it's scalable, and she testified to that as well. And so we want to provide them training. We want them to spend a day with us. We want to hire a contractor, so soon you will be seeing a resolution for your approval to get this sort of training for them. We want to provide 1 to 2 person training so they can spend the day with us, walk in, learn about the standard, and walk out with a quality assurance manual for simple methods for 1 to 2 person laboratories so that they feel confident in the standard, and we think that this will help them succeed. So after a lot of the interactions we've had with the laboratories and talking to them about TNI and the direction of the program, we still have some points of contention. And so you heard about them earlier. So the 2 areas are the 58 modifications that Laura talked about and the potential for increase in fees. So I'd like to talk about these 2. So you heard from Laura that we have extensively worked with the community, and we invested the time to work with them, and we think that was extremely valuable. But the panel, as you heard, felt that those proposed revisions are not actually modifications, and that, except for 2, are really clarifications. And that if we modified the standard, we would have a difficult time, and the state of California would be in isolation. However, but with the laboratory community, you'll hear from them, if we don't modify the standard, then there won't be any force of regulation if we don't put some sort of clarification in some sort of guidance document. So our position is that we don't want the state of California to be in isolation. And we would like to accept the 2 modifications, which is 1 proficiency testing per year per method, which is what we already do, and then support California-specific education and experience. And we would like time. We want time to evaluate the proposed modifications, see if they're really modifications to the standard. You heard me talk about the 3 strategy implementation assistance. We want to take that time for them to learn about the standard, understand it, and we think that giving us a little bit of time will help maybe even daylight more modifications of the standard that could pop up. Who knows? But we would like to move forward with adopting the regulations with 2 modifications.
What does the standard currently have insofar as the time interval for proficiency testing?
2 proficiency testings per
2.
method.
Okay.
And the last area of contention you'll hear later today is the fees, and they're just not happy. And it's completely understandable. Over the last 2 years, their fees have been raised 85%. And that's a big deal. However,
Sorry,
it should,
how does that compare nationally? Sorry to interrupt.
about the fees.
Yeah.
For accredited, I think the better person to ask that question would likely be other commercial labs that pay fees in other states. But
Okay, thank you.
our fees are we're a fee-supported program, so we have to charge fees for what we're allocated 3.3 million in the legislature, and so
No, that's right. Sometimes our fees seem high because we're fee supported and other programs have subsidies from other funding sources. That's true.
correct. And so when we were at the Department of Public Health, the laboratories were charged artificially low fees. So they were being subsidized through the general fund, and it wasn't fully fee supported. And they hadn't had their fees raised in over 10 years. But they're understanding. And so now we're supporting a whole program. And also the third party and TNI compliance will probably make matters worse. But we're sensitive. So as you know, with all fee setting and structures, the Division of Administrative Services fee branch takes the lead. So they've already started an ELAP fees work group to talk about restructuring the fees, and what we will ensure that they discuss is cost neutrality. So you'll be seeing that at the board meeting, maybe sometime this spring, and then also later this September when the fee branch meets with you and talks about other water board program fees.
Could you provide some additional context on this regarding current fees and maybe just taking an example of a small lab versus, say, a medium-sized or a large lab on the fees that they're paying now and what it would cost to get the third-party certification?
So a small lab, maybe 1 to 2 methods might pay $6,000. And if you're a large lab, you might pay $20,000 because you have 20 plus methods. I think there are some laboratories out here that can tell you exactly what the bill is, but that's the wide range. And compared to other states, it's kind of hard to say that because they have their fees, they get on-site assessments from third-party assessors, so they directly pay them their fees.
And then the third-party assessment, you were referring to fees.
So clarify the question again.
If they were to
question is-
contract out for a third-party assessment, roughly what would that cost be?
So it varies. I mean, it depends on where the third-party assessor is located. They might have to travel to that state to pay the travel cost. It depends on the complexity of the method that they're assessing for. So it's a little bit difficult to say. It could be an easy method that takes half a day. It could be multiple methods that take 1 day. So
I'm just trying to get a better sense on cost neutrality because I have no idea. So, but if you don't know, that's fine. Maybe someone else can speak to that.
So the idea in the cost neutrality isn't that we're going to keep the cost of the assessment on the third party to a certain value. What it really is that we're going to look at the cost of that assessment and try and adjust the fee structure so that that they're not paying our staff for an assessment that's not being done. There are underlying costs, and the program has to be supported by fees now. We don't have any general fund, and so there will be a cost associated with even without any assessment, but trying to arrange that to be as cost neutral as possible.
Yeah, understood. It would be a reduction in the fee similar to the dairy program, for example.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a good example.
All right, so that concludes my presentation. I do just want to say thank you for convening the panel because it really was our
it's
roadmap to
essential.
improve the program and for all of your support. And so we look forward to your feedback on our approaches.
I just wanted to add a clarification. In listening to Christine's presentation, it dawned on me that it might not be clear that the T&I standards for the laboratory are off the shelf, and we would incorporate them by reference into our regulations. That would be something that would have to be purchased. We do have for 6 months, the labs would have access to that. But our regulations, the rest of them, how applications are submitted, the proficiency testing and how that's done, and a whole host of things need to also be rewritten. And so that's what we're also talking about when we're saying that we're started to rewrite the regulations. It's that other aspect. The laboratory standards from T&I, we're not planning to touch it, except for those 2 changes.
Okay. No, thank you. Other questions before we take a short break?
There is a legal question that came up in the comments about having, and I know other states have grappled with this, but could you explain if there's a fee to register or use the TNI? Is there a problem legally with that, or how do we navigate the legality
No,
of
that's,
proprietary?
it's something that's done with other regulations too. So for example, your California building standards are something that have to be purchased. So there's entities that put together the standards and they're copywritten, and that's how they're incorporated into our regulations, and it's not uncommon in California and other states to do that.
When it comes to the issue of an expertise gap amongst staff, what is the ability to be able to borrow, say, others from within Cal EPA to be able to fill some of those gaps as far as staff goes? I don't know if there's any sort of issues on that, or is there expertise from elsewhere within the agency that can kind of be drawn in even on a temporary basis? Because I saw that, of the fields, pesticides was one of them. We have a robust department there. Just what are the thoughts or legalities around that?
So I think Darren can answer that question about that being done before. But what I do know about the staff and the qualifications that you need, and Laura could attest to this, and you might want to ask her, it's very technical type of assessment or staff that we need. You have to have years of experience in a laboratory and working on the bench, and also have great communication skills and understand the regulatory craft. And so it's a whole set of skills, not just the technical side. That one already is difficult to have those years of experience. And so that's why we have that $1 million contract that you're helping to get our staff up to speed to be that professional assessor that we need, that the industry has. So I don't know if other agents
Yeah, so,
have that.
I mean, certainly we would look at other agencies. There's often difficulty in them, wanting to provide their staff, which are usually fully engaged under their budgetary constraints for their stated purpose. We'll look at that and see. I think we're looking at something here that is so specialized, though, that it really makes the most sense to contract it out and bring people in on an as-needed basis when we're looking at those specific things. It's a huge cost to hire someone of expertise, have them use that expertise for a very limited period of time, and then, downgrade their activities, and, you're paying a higher fee associated with maintaining that staff. So we'll definitely see if there's other things, and we're required actually, when we're doing contracting, to do a quick review of other state agencies to see whether they have staff and personnel that are available to do that. So we will complete that analysis.
All right, thank you. We will take a 10-minute break, but if you're planning to speak today, please fill out a blue speaker card before you leave for the break so that I have a full count when we get back. We still have a few more speakers. We will resume with Mr. David Kimbrough at 10 minutes. Thank you. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. All right, we're back. Sure. Your shirt. Yeah, I like that. All right, we are back. It is 10:35. I know you're all having a really good time resolving every issue, but we're getting back. Hello? Thanks. I like that energy. At least I think I do. It looked okay. You're all smiling. That's a good thing. All right, now we're going to go to Dr. Kimbrough for 10
Thank you
minutes.
very much. You have my PowerPoint? Yes.
Yep.
I think there's a slide before this one. There we go. All right. Thank you all very much. I am David Kimbrough. I work with the City of Pasadena, but I'm here representing a coalition of accredited laboratories. And I will push this button here. We'd like to begin by thanking the board for this opportunity to present our concerns, and we support ELAP's efforts to improve operations and implement a uniform accreditation standard in California. We really just want to comment on the ERP's proposal requiring all laboratories basically become TNI compliant and the use of third-party assessors. We would like to state, that the group that I represent here includes publicly owned and privately owned labs, very large and very small. So this is not strictly speaking a small lab issue or a large lab issue or a public lab issue. This impacts all laboratories. And we do really want to emphasize that although the impact may be larger on small labs, it impacts all labs. A little bit of background, and I realize I'm speaking for my second time here on this issue, and that last October we had a discussion about this, but we really hadn't had a lot of background on this. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time to frame this. This is a lab manual we have in Pasadena. It was actually issued by the state of California in 1923. California has had a long history of being very interested in laboratory issues as it impacts public health, and in particular small laboratories. California was the first state to approve laboratories. This is the first list of accredited approved laboratories, issued in 1956, but the process began in 1951 with the adoption of this regulation. And so this is Title 17, not Title 22. And it basically tells us why are we accrediting laboratories? Because we want reliable data on water for necessary public health and regulatory responsibilities. And I think that's a really good summary of what we're trying to accomplish with laboratory accreditation. And what's interesting is if you read this regulation from 1951, it basically is the same what we're thinking we're doing now, the same process. And so I wanted to go through that process just a little bit. What does ELAP do? And what is the process outlined in those regulations and in current regulations? Look at documents submitted, review results from performance testing samples, conduct on-site assessments, collect a fee, and issues a certificate or not, depending on how these things work out. It's a pretty straightforward process. So this is a typical lab in California. A quarter of all labs have one person or fewer. There are laboratories that do not have a full-time staff. They are all made up of part-time operators, something like that. Another quarter of the labs, are about 2 people. So half the labs are 2 people or fewer. So this is in fact a fairly typical lab. And what I'm going to do is show this one lab doing one test, pH. So what does ELAP look for? They look, do you have the right facilities and staff? Do you have the proper equipment? Are there proper chemicals? Are the proper procedures being followed? Now earlier, your council mentioned that there are going to be regulations aside from TNI. They're going to be at the updated. That's where all this is specified. And this is actually the accreditation standard. What does the method approved by US EPA and approved by the state of California say for a lab to do? That's the core of accreditation. That is the accreditation standard. So in the PT sample, you look, did the laboratory participate in the study? Did they get the correct value? So you get a sample, they don't know what's in it, they have to correctly identify it and correctly analyze it. And there are about 700 labs, 4,400 FOTs, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of individual results. This is a big task. And I think staff indicated earlier that they understand that, and we all do. So the big issue for us is TNI. And I do want to point out this point, although the N is, there's this national in there somewhere, it's not actually a national standard. There are only 13 states that are TNI compliant. Half of them use the 2003 version of the TNI documents. The other half use 2009. None of them are using 2016. A lot of these states, like California, TNA is voluntary. So there's actually a very small number of states that require all labs to be TNI compliant. Now we do and so what really is TNI? It's a collection of supplemental requirements that do not alter the test methods as required by law, provide additional policy, record keeping, and reporting documentation. So TNI does not alter how a lab is accredited in the sense that you're still going to be looking for all the things that are currently in the old regulations or in the new regulations. What we're doing is adding a bunch of extra stuff.
But isn't that extra stuff sort of the basic to make sure that you're following? How else do you know?
Here is an example. I think this is a good example. It's in the management requirements section. Does the laboratory have policies and procedures to ensure the protection of clients' confidential information and proprietary rights? This has nothing to do with protecting public health. For those of us who are public agencies, we're not legally allowed to comply with this because anything records we have are subject to California Public Records Act. So we cannot comply with this if we wanted to. And this was, in fact, one of the suggestions for modification to the standards, that this has to be deleted. So this does not protect public health.
No,
Doesn't
you
help
could
the state.
modify it. You know,
Doesn't help the
clarify
state
it.
in
You don't
its
have to delete
job.
it.
Another example is purchasing requirements. Does the laboratory have procedures as to comply with specified requirements? The requirements aren't specified. It just says there have to be some specified requirements. And there are literally hundreds of requirements just like this one. And here's an entire section just on organization. It's really important. I've emphasized this in previous discussions. The T&I documents don't actually change how laboratories perform tests. It's a lot of record keeping, it's a lot of documentation, it's a lot of policy, but it does not actually change the way labs operate. So in this case, this one person lab doing one test has to do over an additional 1,000 extra things on top of the things you saw earlier in terms of having the right equipment, right personnel, et cetera, et cetera. That's a lot. And in fact, we had that discussion at the October meeting, that it's the sheer number of requirements. And we had talked about whittling down the number of requirements. But as the current proposal is coming forward, there was little or no whittling at all. And the reason this is important is because the experience of places like Florida and New York, where T&I was put in a compulsory fashion, as opposed to a voluntary fashion, a large number of smaller labs, both government and private, withdrew from the system. There are a significantly smaller number as a result of this process in these two states. Other states, for example, Virginia does not require all labs to be T&I accredited, only commercial labs. Louisiana it's optional. You can choose to be T&I or not T&I. So where it's been mandatory, it has had a large impact on the number of labs that remained in the accreditation program. So what we were talking about the last meeting was, T&I light, T&I minus, that these numbers of requirements would be whittled down to prevent this thing from happening. However, I'm sorry, I skipped right ahead. As far as I know, there's only about 5 things that have been recommended to be deleted. Maybe it's down to 2, I don't know. So really what we have at this point is not T&I minus or T&I light. We actually have T&I plus. We have T&I plus these modifications or clarifications.
Would you be happier if they dropped all the clarifications? Because it wouldn't be plus.
No, that would make the situation even worse. Because the modifications, because of the nature of some of these comments, of these things, they actually contradict what California has done historically. And it's important to public health. So that's why these modifications are in fact, some of them are very, very, very much important. And as I mentioned, there's legal issues. Now, for example, in the California Building Code, the code itself is actually developed by the International Code Commission. California buys that, modifies it, and puts it up adopts it as Title 21 or whatever it is, and you can get it online. So if that's the model, then California would then have to follow that model. But that's not what's being proposed as far as I can tell, and obviously it's still an early stage. Third-party assessors, here's the part of the problem with them is there aren't a lot of, basically we're told, well, ELAB can't do their on-site assessments right now with the current staff. But I would point out that their authorized budget is about the same as it was 15 years ago. And back then they were able to do, not perfectly, but they got something close to every 2 years for almost all their labs. Why can't we do that now? Here are the fund condition statements from the 2 years. And you see the budget's almost identical. The authorized budget was $3.5 million and $3.5 million for next year. The number of staff is authorized and actual are fairly similar. Whoops. Now, let me say, personally, I have been a contractor for government agencies, and I have overseen contractors. The impression given is that you wind these guys up and gals up and you let them go. They require as much supervision as staff does. They require a lot of oversight. And if they can't adequately do their job with this, it's going to take a lot more work for them to maintain oversight of this. If ELAP is unable to hire and retain adequate staff, why would contractors be able to? There's actually a fairly small number of firms that do this kind of work. None of them are based in California. And most of the ones already have jobs. They're already out accrediting labs. So if we wanted to have this program where there's all these on-site assessors out doing this work, Contractors would need to hire people and train them. And on top of that, ELAP would have to have an accreditation program for on-site assessors. Who would decide who's an adequate assessor or not? So now you have to create an accreditation program for the accreditation program. Okay, we discussed PT samples. There's a lot of them. They're being done manual. It's not being done very well. It's very labor intensive. I don't think we need to beat that one up. Everyone, I think we agree on this point. And as we have discussed, over the last 18 months, our fees have already doubled. That's just to get ELAP on a completely fee-supported program. With TPAs, I know I've done the math for my lab, it'll easily double our costs. And and it's going to require, and if we throw TNI on top of that, that's a lot more work, not just for the laboratories, but it's a lot more work for ELAB. They have to go through those thousands of requirements and check each lab. So that's going to put ELAB in a much more difficult spot, as well as the labs. That will drive fees as well. So what we're getting to is, right now, ELAB, and as everyone's pointed out, ELAB is just barely keeping their head above water. On-site assessments aren't being done. Certificates aren't being issued on time. On-site assessments aren't being conducted. Is this the time really to require them to take on a bunch of additional tasks? Even if you thought TNI was the greatest thing since sliced bread, this is really not the time to require it. Thank you very much.
What is your recommendation for what you would do if you were us?
I would recommend not updating your regulations, certainly, and updating methods that are required in those methods, and not going forward TNI for, let's say, 5 years. Let ELAB get their act together. Let them crawl, walk, and then run. And in 5 years, if it looks like you really need TNI is going to do something for anybody, let's figure it out then. Right now, it looks like a lot of extra work with a lot of extra costs without any really benefit to anybody.
I'd like to ask you a question about the small lab issue.
Certainly.
And if you could, I mean, I understand what you're saying when you pulled up that list. I couldn't read it. The print was too small.
Yes.
But all the additional things. What I heard our staff and representative from the expert panel refer to is there's quite a few of those requirements that just don't apply. And so recall the question that I had was, is there some sort of a program where you could look at a more of a one-size-fits-all approach for small labs? And the response was, yeah, we could, bring in training that would, take care of those issues and clarify and get people up to speed within, a half a day.
Well, I'm going to disagree with that assessment. I'll tell you why. A large part of this is what we call quality management systems. There is a quality management system module 2. That is the same for every single lab because it is a quality management system. Where you might have differences is the additional modules that are specific to different types of methods. So in the example here, every lab is going to have a purchasing system and supply that complies with the specification. That can't be sized. Every lab has to have this policy and procedure. It has to be documented. Every year, we have to do an internal audit every year and document we do an internal audit to comply with all these things. So if you look at this slide, Module 1, Module 2, that's the same for every single lab. And Module 4 you see there is only if you're doing one test. It's true, if you start doing more tests, yeah, you'll start adding on additional things. But I've not read anywhere where it says, oh, you can skip certain provisions. That you only have to pass 90% of these. So my understanding is you have to pass every single one. And so that number up there is the bare minimum. It gets bigger from there. That's the scaled down version.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Debbie Webster and Stephen Clark, 10 minutes as well. Oh, they changed your name, Debbie. Yeah, I made it Debbie Webster.
Oh, I didn't even read it. Great.
But
Well,
we know it's Webster.
yeah, there we go. Hey, we had some fun yesterday with some name changes. So anyways, Good morning, Chair Marcus and board members. I'm Debbie Webster. I'm with the Central Valley Clean Water Association.
Pull the microphone just a little closer to
Okay,
you.
I can do that. And
Thank
I
you.
am so glad I don't have to operate this because I've seen what it does the last 2 days. We are a nonprofit of Central Valley POTWs, or publicly owned treatment works in the Central Valley. I want to tell you, we have a very active laboratory committee, which is our members coming together and talking about laboratory issues. And when this process came out, our members have spent a lot of time and thoughtful time going through, making recommendations, coming up things in very, very short time frames, and really have been concerned about it. I do want you to know that we do have several of our laboratory members that are on LTAC. Stephen is one of them. We have some others. But also, just so you get some background, is several of our laboratory members have implemented TMI or have been part of a lab that has had to implement TNI 2009 version, not the new version here. And so they have real-time experience and share that with our group. We also, many of our municipal lab members that are discussing have worked in the private sector too. So they know private sector versus public sector, and that becomes really important. So just on the background of laboratories and wastewater treatment plants is, the laboratories are there to support the wastewater treatment plants. There's definitely a compliance aspect of that. It's required that we have ELAP certified laboratory data. We take the data very seriously, but they do supplement what we really are out there to do, which is protect the environment and public health. And by having a laboratory at a treatment plant and having that ability, we really are able to do that in a much more effective and efficient way, because you're able to respond. And there's tremendous benefit to keeping even these most smallest labs at the facility, because they know the facility, they know the people. We can respond much quicker than waiting 2 weeks in order to get some data back from a private lab. So there's definite benefits to it. I think the concerns that we raise, that we've had, and I'm going to speak specifically to TNI because that is obviously a big issue today, is that in our review of it, it really is towards a commercial lab that's all they do, that's what they're in business for, that they're doing interstate commerce, versus a public lab where our customer is our treatment plant, is our regional boards. Those are where we're focused. We are also a public agency like you are. And so I think that there's a lot of cross connection, and I'm sorry because I can't even tell what my timing is, and I got to make sure I leave enough for Stephen, but okay. There's cross connection between the public, between like the state doing stuff and our public lab. So when it says, oh, the laboratory has to have control over its budget, those type of thing. You don't even have control over your budget. It has to go to the governor. So there's things like that you have to allow us in a public agency to do. And
is that one of the clarifications/modifications?
Well, and so here's where I'm going to go, is that clarifications are great, but when it says thou shall, you shall do this, you shall do that, and then you're in meetings and you hear, but in the notes it says this, so you can do something else, or you don't really need to do it, it's not applicable. I think that we really need to be specific. We need to say what we mean and mean what we say. So if we say shall, then that's what we mean. If we mean that, no, you don't have to do all the shalls, we need to say, you don't have to do this.
Well,
But these might not be
define
applicable.
Control. That's where you would modify it.
Well, but allow that so that if someone comes in and they say, oh, it says you shall do this, and you say, I'm not doing it because of this reason, that's allowed.
But someone who says it is the same person as would be issuing the clarification, right? So it's us.
Yeah, as long as, if it's just, I'd have to see kind of how the format of it is. I mean, I think that you can put it in the regulations so that it's clear up front that
we went through this yesterday a little bit, the belt suspenders, flying monkeys. You don't know how often this, I'm not disagreeing, I'm just saying, I understand that everybody wants every possibility always laid out in a reg. We do this all the time. We can't put every possibility in it. And so the clarification, resolution language, all those things we do, it's a pretty common way for us to say what we mean at least.
And
So I'm just
I
saying,
understand that, and we
You
get
can
on
make
the other
whatever
side.
points you want. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
there's that particular set of issues always leaves me a little cold. I'm sorry.
Okay, and I can understand that, having
Everybody,
been on the
every
other
oil
side.
company wants it. Everybody, everywhere, and everything wants everything spelled out. I've argued for it when I've been a discharger, but we're trying to make it sort of a higher level conversation. I'm just saying this to you because I know you really well, and you're really good, but you see the way we do things.
I
You're
understand.
arguing about the methodology rather than the substance.
No,
that's all.
I'm not trying to do. I'm not trying to do that. What I'm trying to do is make sure that it's well understood, and that because from what you say here, when we get it in and it's in a permit negotiation, it's an enforcement. It doesn't get read that way, and that's maybe a misconnect. And so we need to just make sure that I think that there's simple ways to bridge those gaps, and that's what I'm suggesting. I'm
Okay.
not saying, oh, every single line item, whatever. I'm saying that there is something up front that blatantly says is there's aspects that are not applicable, and if they're not, you need to explain why. And yes, the notes, you may use the notes, and they're valid to use as part of the understanding. And that's very simple way to address some of those issues, but I think that that's very possible. So I know I'm going to take longer now because we
No,
talked a lot about this.
when my comments don't count
It's
against
okay.
your time.
Thanks.
She stops the clock.
Okay, perfect.
When we open our mouths, she stops the clock. And you get to answer. It's totally different than going to a legislative hearing where when you talk, you're taking up our time.
Yeah.
It's sort of one of those weird different.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think that the issue of support to the laboratory community, is a very big issue, and certainly the small agency issue. We have had a chance to take a look at some of the TNI. I am a TNI, or no, I'm a NEDAC member, just so that we could take a look at it. I will tell you, just trying to get there, still have to buy everything. What I see doesn't always help. We're trying to figure out how we can help navigate. We think it's really important that we, what that system looks like in the end. We need to make it so that our laboratories can remain viable, and that for us is the bottom line, and compliant, and are able to go through that. So with that, I'm going to say two kind of specific asks, and then I'm going to turn it over to Stephen because he's going to give you some real life examples of his experience. Is a stakeholder process that's really robust and really, I heard Christine mention that really includes and has very good dialogue with these issues, and that we're able to resolve them as we work through them. I know that there's been it's been very clunky. We'd really like to see an active stakeholder process through this process. And then as a real life example, and I think it might go towards what David Kimbrough was going for, is really, I think that the opportunity to beta test this is now. You're working on the regulations, you're whatever. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. You've got small labs in your own structure. I know the Central Valley Board has two very small labs that are part of their office, but one's up in Reading, one's in in Rancho Cordova. Is have them go through and see what it's like to comply with these, have them identify what some of the roadblocks are, have them identify so that this structure could actually really be implemented, and start there and see how it needs. And you can start now. You have that ability. So with that, I would like to turn it over.
I thought we were already doing something parallel to that. I mean, in terms of maybe not TNI specific, but I was part of the team in 2002 working on the quality management plan for Swamp, and so, I mean, just staff, it's a good question, to the extent that we've applied these principles already in the state program.
Yeah, so I think those are slightly different. My understanding is, Debbie mentions we have two labs. My understanding is they've closed. We do not operate labs anymore. We completely contract out for all our lab services, especially if it's required to be part of a regulatory process. We did operate for a while tiny labs at Region 5 that did some minor sampling, but I believe the professional we had that was in charge of that retired, and those are no longer in existence. So
I
personally,
thought
I'm
there
not
was one
adverse-
at Region 6, a small lab at Region 6. Closed?
Yeah, if we operate them, they're really,
That closed?
yeah. So we still have some equipment that we send out, you know. I guess the definition of a lab, I would not call any of them certified laboratory operating. We do sometimes maintain testing equipment for staff's purposes for inspections, and some
But
people
not
may
for
refer to that as a
enforcement or
lab, but it's,
anything you rely
yeah,
on?
right. No, not something we would rely on in those.
But we do have the swamp quality management plan, and we
Yes.
do field testing, and that
Right.
feeds into our 303D evaluations.
Correct. Right. So to that part, absolutely. We've gone through this huge effort to continuously improve the swamp quality improvement and data quality. And
Yeah. So I'm just emphasizing this because this is part of the state water board and regional water board culture already. You know, these principles that you're bringing to our attention. So I've lived it personally. You know,
Yeah.
so I know I know the perspective.
I heard her point just to say have some of our folks who are in labs take a look at it, see how they feel
I want
about
to
it.
say, actually try to do it.
Yeah.
See what it takes. See what it takes. And
Well,
I think it's a good suggestion.
Yeah, I appreciate the suggestion about piloting at least with small labs that are out there that would volunteer, perhaps even to say, you know, we want to be guinea pigs, if you will, to be able to see how it works in the real world.
Chair Marcus, Vice Chair Moore, and board members. My name is Stephen Clark. I am with Pacific Ecorisk. We have an aquatic toxicology testing laboratory located in Fairfield. I'm also an LTAC member that represents that niche group of laboratories. So you might question, why am I here working with Civiqua? The reason is that I am on the Civiqua's laboratory committee, and one of our goals is to help them go through and address issues that affect the laboratory and emerging policy. And the reason I was asked to come here today is that my laboratory transitioned from ELAP to NELAP back in 2004. And I had the pleasure of leading that exercise. And so I'm quite intimately familiar with the energies and efforts, time commitments, and the process. So I wanted to not go with an assumption that TNI is going to be adopted here, but within the framework, if something like TNI is adopted, what does it take for laboratories to do that? And to maybe complement some statements that have already been made today with some additional direction. And so I think one of the challenges that we found was that implementing the TNI standard really took a lot of thought because of the short narrative statements in the policy, in the standard. And even the small laboratory guidance document doesn't provide an awful lot more. I'm going to give you one example, and really within the context of small municipal laboratories, 1, 2, or 3 people that are going to have to devote time. And so one of the elements in the TNI standard is section 4.16, data integrity investigations. And it reads as follows: all investigations resulting from data integrity issues should be conducted in a confidential manner until they are completed. These investigations shall be documented, as well as any notifications made to clients receiving any affected data. That's it. So we had to sit down and go, what does that mean? How are we going to script this? How would we do, or how have we done something like that? But it's got to be documented. And now consider that process needing to be documented by some 400 or so municipal laboratories, many of which are small and stretched thin with resources. And so one of my recommendations, both as an LTAC member and to you, is that going beyond guidance and training and have ELAP staff dedicated to draft templates. Because you can imagine if there was a template documented just on that one, 400 different laboratories, let alone the private sector labs that would need to do this, would be a step ahead of the curve. Where that's also going to help, and by the way, I'm also very happy to hear that Christine and the ERP support training and guidance, but
templates.
That's a step, right? Templates go, and well, some of the templates were already available under TNI. The ones I'm talking about are not. And so where this will help is it will help laboratories be efficient. It will help harmonize a lot of what's going on in laboratories. Potentially, labs can choose not to use them. And I think where it will help a tremendous amount is on the on-site assessments. Consider yourself being an auditor, and you need to go in, and some hundreds of laboratories are doing something the same way. You've seen the narrative, you've seen how it's being applied, and you just need to confirm that it's actually being executed. So I think that template guidance documents beyond the QA manual, beyond the TNI standard, will go a long ways to get California from whatever standard, well, the process we have now to the future standard, down the road in a manner that will help Christine and her staff see achievements on the timelines that she put out before you today. And again, this was I just picked one because I knew I had a few minutes. I could have went on and on with the same types of things. A couple of sentences, and the laboratory has to sit there and go, okay, I need to document that, I need to write it up, and then I need to follow up with the back end as well. So I welcome any questions that you might have in regards to my recommendation.
Other questions? We'll come back on discussion. You guys will be around.
You had a question about costs for ELAP versus NELAP earlier for private sector laboratories. Somebody said, how much does it cost for a private sector lab to get ELAP and NELAP? And
Board Member Diadama.
yeah. Now, we're not using a third-party auditor because, in essence, we kind of are. The state of Oregon is now our accrediting body for ELAP. Our fee for that, we're only listed for 2 fields of testing under the 2 different toxicity fields of testing. It's about $6,000 out of Oregon. Includes travel, implementation. It is an agency, it's not a private sector firm, and we're paying around $3,000 a year through ELAP. We've also looked at third-party auditors to come out and support our laboratory for some additional accreditations that are very much like TNI, and it was around $25,000 spread out over 3 years, and that included a lot of the travel-related time from specialists back east or something like that, so about $7,000 a year for the on-site assessment. Understanding we'd be tacking on some additional accreditation. So my expectations of one of the executives is we'd be looking somewhere around $5,000 that would be related to the TNI element if we were to use an outside accrediting body and that's on an annual basis, plus the fee for ELAP. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Gives us a scale sense. Thank you very, very much. Next is Bruce Godfrey, 10 minutes. Oh, Dr. Godfrey. Sorry, I don't have all the titles on my list. My apologies. How refreshing.
I'm Bruce Godfrey, and I'm here representing the American Council of Independent Labs. Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
No, if you pull it closer, you don't have to lean.
Yeah. All right, so I'm Bruce Godfrey here representing the ACIL, American Council of Independent Labs. My employer, the Montrose Environmental Group, has me doing technical and regulatory oversight of 7 labs with a staff of 450 people across 4 different states. So ACIL's we're the National Trade Association for Independent Labs. We have about 1,500 laboratories across the country, perform more than half of the tests that go for regulatory practices in California. And we're supporting the adoption of the standard, the TNI standard, and we're supporting the use of third-party accrediting bodies, and also the retaining the accrediting authority within ELAP. Trying to figure out which button to push here. The right. Oh, thank you. Okay, so about the standards for labs and what ACIL supports is standards for laboratories as well as accrediting bodies. And there's earlier comments made about how do you accredit the accrediting bodies. Well, there are mechanisms for this, and so we always, within the laboratory community, support standards, essentially. Just like the building codes, they're developed by consensus. In the case of TNI, this was developed by regulators and labs across the country, and it was written for all labs. Granted, there are some issues with public and private sector labs that we've been talking about, but that'll all be hashed out. The standards define procedures and practices, conformity assessments to the standard, help everybody understand how to do it. And, TNI is the national standard. And I think that's the best tack for California, is to develop that standard and then implement a phased implementation of the standard for the laboratories that are, going to have a little bit of difficulty implementing this. So standards-based accreditation systems, they facilitate all sorts of things. It gives you a structure for which to run your program around. It'll reduce the time for labs and instrument manufacturers. If we want to bring on new testing procedures and things like this within the standards, within this mechanism, it'll be a lot faster. The best example right now are the perfluorinated compounds. They're PFOS, PFOA. They're fire retardants in airports, considerably toxic in drinking water. And, you know, to put that type of regulatory program in, this mechanism will speed it up a lot. Instrument manufacturers can work with laboratories, and we should reduce the times to get it all done.
So are you saying that the more consistent we are with standards across a bigger arena, the more you get the economy of scale driving those sorts of things?
That's correct. That's exactly what I'm saying. Because these are international standards, so there are compounds in Europe. Like my laboratories operate across the full range of the fields of testing that ELAP has: industrial hygiene, air pollution, that type of thing. And in Europe, they have different methods that candidly do a better job than some of the methods we have available. And these systems will make that possible to move quicker, you know, in the public interest of California.
I understand some of the toxics regulatory systems in Europe, and they are tougher than ours, to be sure. It wouldn't be that hard to be tougher than our national standards, just to be clear, but they have spent a lot more time thinking about this stuff than we have.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, there are differences. Sometimes, for example, in the air pollution or air testing business, we, in the United States, Summa canisters, in the continent, sorbent tubes are the standard. And actually, for some compounds, one's better than the other. So there are a lot of technical issues that come into play here. Regarding the standard, ACIL's basically asking California not to modify the standard at all, and we would go on recommendation of a phased implementation of the entire national standard. And this will allow the kinds of things that have been talked about earlier in terms of, you know, some type of phased implementation will let people get experience with it. They'll find the things that don't work, and then ELAP will have a chance to adjust themselves to which things are important in the standard and which things aren't. But we would ask the board to adopt the full standard undiluted, because it has advantages. For example, one of the things that was brought up was suppliers. You know, would you actually look at your suppliers? I can think from my laboratory several times where we've purchased poor calibration standards for the instruments. When you evaluate your suppliers, you look at that and find out, oh my, the reason why we failed this PT sample is we got a bad calibration standard from a supplier. You go in and you change it, and it works. That's just one example of this kind of thing. And that we will have a temporary two-tier system. ACIL, because we are large commercial labs, we're recommending that all fee-for-service labs, if you're hanging out your shingle and you're providing test and measurement services to the public, you should comply to the full standard. And with respect to the public sector agencies and the others that have come in here, we would be willing to work with them on a phased implementation. And in that case, we would have a temporary two-tier system, but that has value and quality improvement across the board. The folks that have implemented this in other states have seen, particularly Florida, which is what we're familiar with because they're leading us, you know, on this effort. They're ahead of us with the same kind of system. They've seen big improvements in their laboratories, and this is one of those cases of benefit. I could talk for a long time about the benefits of standard conforming third parties. Fundamentally, it's a good-to-go system. There have been some comments about the fact there's not enough. I don't think so. When these folks are for-profit or not-for-profit, but they're running businesses. And I pretty much guarantee you if California goes to a third-party system, we will have offices for 3 of the 4 or 4 of the 4 major ABs, and we'll go from 4 ABs to 6 ABs, I mean accrediting bodies, in this state. And this is a proven model. It works very well. And it's going to do better than just overcome the backlog. In my laboratories where we do use third-party assessors because they are better at this business. And then we can, through a lot of states, we hire one third-party firm, come in to assess all the laboratories. They issue reports that allow us to improve practices and procedures. And, you know, candidly, it's a far better assessment than any public sector body that's provided these services in the past. It isn't to say you couldn't have it. It's also been proven in other industries, clinical, food, drug, product testing arenas. These third-party models they're proven to be the way to go. It is a good system. Are there going to be difficulties implementing this? Yeah, but we're around. I'm on LTAC. I've been on LTAC for 4 years. We can help, you know, with the issues that will come up. And they're kind of predictable because Florida's have paved the way here. And you might have heard that TNI will, you know, the adoption of TNI will drive laboratories out of business, but what we've learned in Florida is this isn't the case. Correlation is not causation. Just because they adopted TNI doesn't mean these labs exited the system or they shut down. What's occurred mostly is for either economic reasons, consolidation of utility districts, or just the choice that the laboratory or the utility district doesn't need to operate an accredited laboratory. If they have regulatory testing needs, they can send them out. But there is no real causation between the adoption of the TNI standard and laboratory closures or exiting the system. Most of the labs that have exited the systems in the states that I'm familiar with, they do it fundamentally for economic reasons. It isn't a standard thing. And then we still have a program here. You know, the ELAP has enforcement, they have PT, they have accreditation body recognition and performance reviews, and we're going to have to decide how do we recognize those ABs and what's appropriate. From the ACIL standpoint, we would insist that they be third-party accredited by ILAC or NACLA. There are separate agencies that do this. They're international agencies. It's a rigorous program. To our knowledge, there's no public sector body in the country that could ever conform to ISO 17011, but it is a real seriously good standard. But if we get ABs that follow those, you know, that are accredited by ILAC or NACLA to be conforming to 17011, they are great systems. They are great accrediting bodies, and they will do a better job for us than any alternative that, you know, the large commercial laboratories are aware of. And we've also seen states where smaller laboratories have been able to comply without. There's difficulty, there's training time. I wouldn't want to disagree with Steve Clark. When my laboratory I ran in Berkeley for 35 years, staff of 80 people, when we first implemented the TNI standard, there were issues. We had to get familiar with it. And I think some of what you're hearing from these people is related to the fact that they haven't done it. Yeah, it's a problem in some cases, but once you've done it, you've got experience. It's a little like taking an algebra test. You know, sometimes you pass the test and maybe you didn't got to go back and relearn quadratic equations, but it's one of those kind of things that experience makes easier your compliance year on year on year. And if we have the 6 years to implement this that Christine talked about, I would like to see it 3 years, but if it's 6, I think that's enough time.
Thank you. Question? That was helpful. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Polimas? 10 to 15, you say?
Good morning still. Darren Polhemus, Deputy Director for Division of Drinking Water. I won't take 15 minutes. I just wanted to
I like the fact
quick
you've all
wrap up.
given me estimates that are more than the time you're going to take.
Yes.
I can't tell you how
Isn't it feel
refreshing
better
that
to
is.
save time?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to wrap up with a few reminders. Just first off, you know, there's certainly some comments that were too drinking water centric, and that, you know, that we're looking at this from that standpoint. And I can assure you that I bring much more water quality experience than I do drinking water, and even some of my old experience doing inspections, inspecting labs at wastewater treatment plants and whatnot. And so we really are focused and understand that ELAP has to be for all environmental laboratory programs. And while it's under the Division of Drinking Water, that's not our perspective. Christine also brings that outside experience. And so I just wanted to assure everybody that when we consider all of these things, we are contemplating them in the environmental laboratory concept as a whole. I also clearly understand that change is scary. It's hard, and we're asking people to make a big step that hasn't been asked of them in a long time. And I think Christine in her presentation and what we're committed to is showing that we recognize that, we appreciate that, we've had to deal with that ourselves, and we're trying everything we can to ameliorate that and make it so that it's easier for folks to do this. We want them all to succeed. I think she said that several times, and that's really at our best interest for the state as a whole. This isn't a trying to throw something out to jump there. And it is a bit ironic as well that, you know, usually we're criticized for trying to lead the pack, and here I am trying to catch up. I want a standard that I can say we meet with the other states that are implementing this. Not that we're trying to be even better than them, but I just want to be with them. Of course, later I'll come back with how I want to be better than the other states, but for the moment, I just want to catch up. And I think one other key point that, just listening to the previous commenters, that I think is something to mention. So in my experience at the Water Board and other programs where we implemented things where there was necessary to do training, we ourselves are not good at that. As state board staff, as regional board staff, we're not, we're not tuned up for it. We don't hire the right people educated for it. And so there is a huge benefit to be able to use something like the T&I standard that comes with all those training packages. And where we've been successful in our other water quality programs, similar where we've brought education, we've also relied on outside independent training groups. Casco and Stormwater, to mention one, comes instantly to mind, and there's many others as well. We partnership with CWEA and others when we need activities like that. And so I think it's just a huge benefit and deserves mention that by going with a standard that has these training packages that will have many of the templates that were mentioned before that are needed. And of course, you know, if we find one that we need, I'm sure we have the commitment from the T&I folks that they will work with us to develop those that are what we identify as missing will not be responded to as, oh, well, that's too damn bad. It'll be responded to as, oh, that's a good idea. We should make that for everybody. And they're committed to do that. And I've been really impressed with how open they've been to take that approach with us. So that gives me some comfort as well. And with that, I think we should hear from our other commenters, unless you had questions.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move to speakers. It's going to be 3 minutes each. Some folks have asked for a few more, but I encourage you to make it 3. We have found that 3 minutes is enough time to crystallize what it is you want us to be thinking about as we interact with staff going forward. Sometimes more is not more. So, but most people have asked for 3, so I don't anticipate that will be too difficult. I'll read I'll read them in 3, so you have a little bit of time to be prepared, and you can not be worrying about just being the next person called up. First, Dan Jackson from the city of Benicia, followed by John Peterson from El Dorado Irrigation District, followed by Cindy Zernecki from Helix Water District.
Is it on? Yeah. Chair Marcus and board members, thank you for the opportunity to present some remarks. I was fortunate enough to be invited by Dr. Weisberg to give a presentation on small laboratory issues to the ERP meeting on January 31st. So I thought I would summarize the recommendations because I don't have the whole 20 minutes that it took at that meeting. To prepare for that, I visited some 1 to 2 person labs. My lab in the city of Benicia, we do water and wastewater, and we have a 4-person lab, 6 FOTs. I think that when I'm talking about small labs, I'm not talking about my own laboratory. I think when I first got into this, I thought I was a small lab, but now I think we're probably right in the middle. We're like medium sized. But in visiting the small labs, one of them I want to discuss is a 1-person wastewater lab. And when looking at the extra resources that would be needed to transition to TNI, their current plan is to decertify, to retain their laboratory staff to do on-site testing for BOD and other process control parameters, but everything regulatory they would send out. In many cases, this would mean paying for duplicate analyses that they're going to do in-house. So this would just impose extra costs on them of more contract lab costs without any benefit to either the state or the agency. And I think there's a lot of labs. So when Bruce Godfrey talks about economic issues driving labs out of business, I think what we're talking about is the extra resources it takes to transition to TNI and to maintain that transition adds extra costs. And some agencies are going to conclude that having an in-house lab is not worth that extra cost. And that's what's going to drive drive these small labs out of business. I think it's an issue, and I know that the board is concerned about this. So the 6 recommendations I had, the first one was to do a census because ELAP does not know the size distribution of the laboratories. And my understanding from Christine at the CWA conferences, they're actually working on this, not by sending out a survey, but by mining the information they already have. And I think that's really smart. Second recommendation was, and here's where I agree with Dr. Godfrey, is a temporary 2-tier system. And I would like to point to the stormwater program perhaps as an example of phase 1 for the larger agencies, phase 2 for the smaller agencies. And you can use a lot of the lessons you learn in phase 1 to help the smaller agencies in phase 2. And I think that might be how you...
Well, that would help in generation of templates, too.
It would help with generation of templates. It would also help with ELAP's resources, where they're not trying to eat the whole whale at once, but they're trying to work on the larger and then learn lessons that then could be applied to these smaller, more vulnerable agencies. And that should be defined as small labs with doing simple tests. The last point, the last recommendation, since I've run out of time, was on-site consultant support. And this is a little different than just training. These smaller labs will need somebody to visit them repeatedly. And so I would suggest some sort of needs-based financial assistance for these very small labs to have somebody who works with them on a repeated basis, because implementing TNI, as Stephen Clark talked about, and we've dipped our toe in the water, so I have some idea of what this is about, really means reworking everything that you do. Everything that a laboratory does, all their workflow will change because of the documentation requirements that are attached to every step. So it's a really massive and intimidating undertaking. And so it's not just that you go to school or someone writes your documents for you. You need someone to be able to work with the lab on an extended basis, come back, see how they're doing, make improvements, and it's especially for these very small agencies. So thank you for the extra time.
Thank you. Thoughtful.
Any questions? Okay.
Mr. Peterson, followed by Mr. Necki, followed by Kevin Calderwood from Kauai.
Good morning, Chair Marcus, members of the board. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in front of you today. My name is John Peterson. I'm the district chemist for El Dorado Irrigation District in Placerville, California. I'm here this morning to represent smaller labs and the issues that concern if ELAP should adopt the TNI standards. I've worked in wastewater and water laboratories for 10 years in effectively what were 1-person laboratories. In a small laboratory, I was responsible from everything from scheduling analysis to the final reports and everything in between. As you can imagine, that's a fairly full-time job. The types of positions are full-time jobs, and even though we send a lot of our stuff out to contract labs, there's still a lot of work to be done. What we offer is quick feedback to chief plant operators if we do our tests in-house, so that he or she can make correct process control decisions in order to ensure protection and health and welfare of our customers and the environment. With the much more onerous requirements of the T&I standards, small laboratories would have no choice but to shift even more of their analytical work to contract laboratories. This would not only impose greater costs to their governing institutions, but would result in delays in getting results to chief plant operator, thus putting timely process control measures and adjustments in jeopardy. In-house laboratory that can get information promptly into the hands of the operators that need it without incurring additional costs of expedited turnaround times is extremely important. Some of the basic analytical testing smaller labs perform fall under the simple tests. Under T&I, the analytical and QA/QC requirements for these simple test methods will not change except to add additional layers of documentation on top of it. When given the choice between conducting simple tests like total suspended solids in-house and adding all of these layers of additional requirements on top of it or sending it out to a contract lab, I think we know pretty much what the decision is going to be. It's going to be the district laboratory analyst or chemist is just going to be a courier way stop for larger contract laboratories. They're going to send those tests out. Excuse me. I believe that that should be one of the goals for ELAP to work with and promote smaller laboratories. This would have several benefits, including quicker access to results and creating a base of experience and well-rounded laboratory professionals. These laboratory professionals would be a boon to smaller districts and would provide coverage to more remote facilities and disadvantaged communities. We understand that the need to improve the current ELAP standards. However, the T&I standard is by design to promote and facilitate interstate lab commerce. That is in contrast with the small on-site laboratory capabilities and functions. For smaller laboratories, there should be either carve-outs or, failing that, because of the all-in nature of the T&I standards, there should be a delineated outreach program. Small laboratories are an asset, not a liability. They should not be trampled underfoot in order to provide a one-size-fits-all standard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Oh,
Thank you.
hi. Ms. Zernicki, followed by Mr. Calderwood, followed by Allison McKenzie from Babcock Labs.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and board members. Thank you for hosting this workshop and for taking our feedback. My name is Cindy Zernicki. I'm from Helix Water District in San Diego County. I am the lab director for a two-person lab, and I was also part of the stakeholder advisory committee for choosing the expert review panel, and a former LTEC member. I wanted to make a few comments. The first one is that I do commend ELAP and also the report that came out for noting that the communication between the labs and ELAP has greatly improved, which we all notice and appreciate. And as always, I am here to help in any way that I can, and I'm sure everybody else is here and willing to work with ELAP and make these changes. I do have some concerns. The first one was when I listened to Christine's speech about the cost neutrality of hiring a third-party assessor. I don't understand how this could actually truly be cost neutral to a lab, and I think that that needs to be explored a little bit further and verify that truly is cost neutral before we go forward and just say it's cost neutral. We need to do some studies on that. I don't know how that hiring these third parties out could not affect a small lab's bottom line. And of course, I'm not just speaking for a small lab, but all labs, it will affect the bottom line. And going into what Bruce Godfrey talked about, economic reasons for the Florida lab shutting down, I believe that the economic reasons could very well be that the new T&I standard, the labs couldn't afford to stay in business. So yeah, economic reasons because of the standard and the resources needed to implement those standards was too costly. Next, the main concern I have here is adopting the full T&I standard with the two exceptions and having 58 clarifications. This doesn't seem practical to me at all because some of these clarifications really, they're not clarifications at all, but some of the way that the requirements are written are very clear. It's just they don't make sense for a small lab or for a lab that's regulated by Title 22 for California drinking water labs. I'll give a couple of examples. Well, sample disposal, the lab shall have SOPs for the disposal of samples, digestates, leachates, and extracts or other sample prep products. This is something that's outside of ELAB's legal purview and is regulated by Cal, OSHA, and local governments. So why would that be in the standard? Requires the lab determine a LOQ for every analyte when California, we don't even use that term level of quantification. We use detection level for reporting limits. There's an awful lot of clarifications, and some of them are just, I don't think they need to be clarified. I think they need to be changed in the standard itself. It's not a clarification when you're totally rewriting it. The other comment really quickly is that I do feel that, we're talking about these 58 modifications, but the entire standard hasn't been fully vetted. It hasn't even been approved yet. So we really shouldn't just write these 58 standards, but review them all further, make it clear that if there are changes that need to be made in the future, they could be added and not just stuck to 58.
Well, we're not adopting the reg today, as you heard. It's going to be a long process. This is a workshop to
Understood.
talk about it, so.
Understood. Those are my comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Those are
you
good.
very much for listening.
No, thanks for coming. Mr. Calderwood, followed by Ms. McKenzie, followed by Bruce LaBelle from DTSC.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Kevin Calderwood. I work with HDR Engineering in Folsom, California, but I'm here today in my role as Vice President of the California Water Environment Association. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. CWEA is a nonprofit public benefit organization of wastewater professionals dedicated to the education and certification of our members who work in all aspects of wastewater treatment, regulations, and environmental protection. As part of its mission, CWEA provides training programs and validated technical certification of competency to qualified wastewater professionals in a variety of specialties, including laboratory analysts. We currently have more than 9,900 members with 833 individuals holding CWEA laboratory analyst certification. CWEA strongly urges that ELAP regulatory language regarding recognition of CWEA and California Nevada AWWA laboratory analyst certification, currently found in Title 22, Division 4, Chapter 19, Article 9, be retained and incorporated into future ELAP regulations. Many agencies in California rely on CWEA's laboratory analyst certification program to validate employee job training and competency for their staff. CWEA is also very concerned that requiring all ELAP certified labs to comply with TNI 2016 will be a hardship for many small labs with scarce or limited resources and may result in undesirable or unintended consequences, including lab closures and associated loss of jobs, as intensive paperwork requirements cause small agencies to outsource regulatory compliance work to consultants or commercial labs. Increased risk to public health and the environment due to test results from commercial labs being delayed when compared to in-house labs. This delay could result in additional NPDES permit violations and the potential for extended source drinking water contamination by increasing the duration of such incidents. And increased ELAP fees due to the closure and reduction of the number of ELAP accredited laboratories. With lab closures, costs could be spread across fewer accredited labs, resulting in higher fees for those remaining. CWEA believes that a simple solution to most of the issues that would be created with blanket adoption of the 2016 TNI standards would be to exempt non-commercial drinking water and wastewater labs that perform only simple tests. This compromise solution has been adopted by many states that have adopted some form of TNI or NELAC standards into their lab accreditation programs. This exemption would cover the majority of labs conducting daily compliance tests to assess drinking water and wastewater operations, the same labs that would be at risk of closure if the 2016 TNI standards are adopted without exception.
What other states have done that?
I'm sorry?
What other states have
I don't have that information with me. I'm sorry. We will have members of CWEA's lab committee speaking today, they may be able to answer that question for you.
When you say simple test, do you mean total suspended, what do you mean?
Precisely. TSS, BOD, pH, those kind of tests.
Those things that people are doing on quick tests rather than the exotics?
I'm
or
sorry?
the more complex compounds?
Yes. Thank you for your attention to this important issue. CWA remains committed to working together to make California's lab community stronger and continuing to protect public health and the environment. Thank you.
Thanks.
Was the proposed modification pertaining to your first comment about education?
I'm sorry?
We heard earlier from the expert panel that a proposed modification to the TNI standard would relate to education.
Yes.
And is that in line with your first comment?
Well, the first comment about retaining the certification standards?
Yes. Is that in line with that?
I don't think they conflict.
Is it responsive to your comment?
I don't think training alone is a substitute for retaining the certification currently provided by CWA and American Water Works Association.
Yes. So the answer is yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. McKenzie, followed by Mr. LaBelle, followed by Tony Pirandini from Cahuilla and Vacaville. Okay. Hi.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and Board. I really appreciate the opportunity provided here to comment this morning. My name is Allison McKenzie, and I'm looking at my notes because I can't remember what year I started in the lab business. But according to what I wrote down here, it was 1978. I have a whole bunch of comments, but what I would like to begin with is simply to point out, in terms of the arguments being put forth regarding what forces small laboratories to go out of business, two of our current clients, we were serving them before they closed their laboratories, or actually we were serving three clients. One is no longer a client of ours. The impetus for closing their laboratories, just like the state board's impetus for closing the laboratories that the state board was operating, had nothing to do with adoption of TNI. It had everything to do with the cost of operating a laboratory. There's a big difference between process control and operating a laboratory that's providing you with NPDES permitted data. True? So my first comment is that the international community clearly disagrees with the claim that quality systems documentation is just busy work or only applies to commercial laboratories. The majority of states recognize TNI, the DOD, the EPA, and all 13 of Dr. Kimbra's states that actually have gone to the extent of operating their own TNI compliant AB. They all agree that a comprehensive quality management system does improve data quality in the laboratory. And in fact, just like a high tide, it raises all the boats in the water. The standard is written to be flexible and accommodating to a variety of types of laboratories, large or small, hazmat, wastewater, drinking water. And to the unfamiliar or perhaps uninformed, it may appear to be busy work or loosely written. However, as I just mentioned, as someone who's been dealing with the standard in the laboratory for a number of years, not quite since 1978, but a number of the years nonetheless, I've seen the proof of the usefulness over time of a quality system and NELAP accreditation. Thank you.
Mr. LaBelle, followed by Mr. Pirandini, followed by Mindy. I always get this wrong, I'm sorry. It could be Boelle, could be Bell. You'll have to tell us. Boelle. I like it, but it's not obvious how to say it. Okay. Hi.
Oh, I want to say thanks for having this workshop. I applaud the progress made by ELAP, especially the work with the state agency, regulatory agencies, and their work with all the stakeholders and the labs. I think that's really great. It's active communication. It's not simply passive. I also support the recommendations of the expert panel. I think there's a lot of work went into it and a lot of input. The standards, I see it should address all elements of a lab and its operations that may affect the quality of the results. As a regulatory agency, we need confidence in the quality and reliability of the data, relevant, consistent, auditable, both by ELAP and us. As I see it, TNI is flexible. It's not vague. It has lots of detail, but the principle is say what you do what you say, document what you did. It allows the labs to say how they're going to address each of those sections in a way that's relevant for them to the extent that's relevant. If it's not, that won't affect the quality of the results, you don't do it in a way that does not, unless it affects the quality of the results in effect. So these are things that TNI identified as affecting the quality of the results. Labs may consider some of the items not helping them improve the quality of their work. They may be right in some cases because some of the documentation really is useful for auditability, ensuring compliance so that others, the TNI auditor or others can actually, or just their customers can be assured that, or have a way to be assured that the quality was there.
The purpose of it isn't necessarily, it can help people in the lab, but the purpose is for us and everybody else to be able to rely on it through some system.
Yeah, the underlying purpose is the reliance on it.
Yeah.
It does help in the consistency because essentially it's saying what you're going to do means that everyone in the lab will be held to a certain standard to do it. So there is the documentation of what you're supposed to do, and that's what you'll be audited against. A principle of quality systems is compliance and improvement, not gotcha. And that's one thing I think a lot of people are worried about is the gotcha. And a true quality system, you're never perfect. It's recognized. There's always a component of it is the continuous improvement, corrective action, continuous improvement. So an audit conceptually is a positive thing. It's someone coming in like a peer, in effect, saying, hey, by the way, look at this. You're not doing this. You could do it better. So that principle, I think, will be important, especially for small labs, to have that, the person walking the door has that philosophy. There are some labs that are doing inappropriate or fraudulent activities. That's enforcement. But compliance, to me, is an important concept and improvement. One thing I do is straight face test is one way I look at what we should be doing, and that's essentially state the opposite. California's standards should not address all the elements of a laboratory and its operations that may affect regulatory agency confidence in the quality of the results. California standards should be weaker than the best practices identified by other states and the TNI National Consensus Expert Body. Or only hold labs to the minimum required in the specific EPA methods, even though EPA and the methods themselves recommend additional steps to be undertaken. So that's just one way to picture it. A key thing, I think, is how do we help especially the small labs, recognizing this is not give them a certain amount of time and then gotcha. So that's what I have. And it's really ongoing assistance, I think, to small labs especially.
Thank you. Good advice. Mr. Pirandini, followed by Ms. Boelle, followed by Adam Borchardt from the Association of California Water Agencies.
Hi, good morning, Chairman Marcus and members of the board. I'm representing the California Water Environment Association and also City of Vacaville, and I'm part of that Civic Lab Committee group. I'm here today to voice my concern over the ERP recommendation to adopt 2016 TNI standards or whatever standard may follow that as a full adoption. And I would recommend that we would actually reference the standard rather than adopt it or marry it. I'm going a little off script because I think that by adopting it, it's relatively inflexible. As we've noted, we've tried to just 2 changes were made. 58 were proposed, but only 2 were considered even something that could be done, and the other, I guess, 56 are being like, we don't want to do them. But California is...
So that's absolutely not what they're
Okay,
saying.
well, that's good to know. But I see that new ELAP regulations are going to have to be developed, and better ones than what we have today. The problem really is that as I see this, is that the program itself during the recession lost some support. There's a lot of reorgs at the state at the time, and we've gone from the Department of Public Health to the Department of Drinking Water, and then you had some retirements, and then we fell behind in audits, and after a while we said, wow, we got this broken program. And so then we're coming in and said, well, let's just, we're broken not because we didn't have a standard. If people had been doing their jobs, I think we wouldn't be here where we are today. But so we're looking at a third-party standard developed by a third party, and we're saying we want to adopt it and do what it does. But it's only 3 states of the 13 accrediting bodies. Only 3 of them are applying it to everybody. Everyone else is allowing exemptions for particularly their municipalities and such. And that's because they recognize that this additional burden is actually going to detract the laboratories from actually doing their work, and they won't have the employees to be able to comply. So they're going to end up basically subbing most of their work out. And I think you're going to see a big drop in enrollment in the ELAP program as a result. I think that's undesirable. Finally, since I only have 30 seconds, I wanted to disagree a little bit with the premise that QC is, that laboratories are trying to avoid QC, and that's busy work. That's not the case here. That's not why laboratories are scared of TNI. QC is part of every method, and ELAP has ensured over the years that we're following QC systems and our QA manuals and such. So it's not like all these laboratories out there don't have systems in place. ELAP has actually done a fairly good job in the past. It just hasn't been good lately. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. You know who you are. Mr. Fortune, now I'm afraid.
I narrated, I'm sorry.
And then after the third will be Fred Waymeyer from Nevada Irrigation District. Sorry.
Board, thank you for allowing me to speak. I just wanted to answer the question earlier that Oregon is one example of a state that requires TNI for drinking water labs, but they have no regulation on wastewater labs at all. So, there are ones that give exemptions to other things, but Oregon is one example. Again, I've been very fortunate to be part of LTAC. Sometimes I feel fortunate, sometimes not quite so much.
It's always that way.
Along with this process. Did you have? Okay, I'm sorry. It's been a process where I was very excited to be part of helping ELAP rejuvenate themselves, get better. They were having issues, but it has been very frustrating in the sense that we have put the amount of time and energy into this process. And honestly, I feel that so many of the recommendations LTAC has put forward have been completely ignored. We have only 6% of California labs are TNI certified, and yet we have 31% of the LTAC members work for TNI labs, and yet recommendations even still come forth that the majority did not support full TNI. That was ignored. And again, it went into really taking in what agency partners wanted, although the majority of the agency partners do not have ELAP certified labs. The one that did in the room was always in the favor of not doing full TNI. And that's one where you were looking for an example of maybe a lab that can pilot this, and I apologize immensely to Fish and Wildlife because they have been supportive in not wanting this, but they have an ELAP certified lab. There's a state agency. The Department of Health labs that are ELAP certified, can they be pilots on this? They're state-run agency labs. Again, I apologize because I know they've been on the side of saying, wait a minute, is this required by everyone? But there's a couple examples that maybe we can explore as pilot labs. A couple other points that I really want to make or bring up is, we have 66 labs that only have one FOT, one method. We have another 50 labs in California that have one FOT and 2 methods. Those labs, we talk about labs are not going to close. Last week, I was at the CWEA conference talking with lab people all day. Labs and agencies are already talking about this. Yes, it's a financial cost, and labs close for other reasons, but the resources required, whether it's additional staff, additional software, whatever it takes, the financial reason there, or having to send stuff out, labs are talking about closing. They're all crunching the numbers right now. My best guess is that California is going to lose 100 labs from its ELAP program. The increase in fees and the increase in T&I cost is going to cause these labs to close. And then the rest of the labs that stay T&I certified or ELAP certified are going to have higher fees in order to cover that. So when we look at this, we need to really think that small labs are closed. I totally appreciate, sorry, I just want to say this, the timeline that Christine spelled out today, the training resources, I think that's wonderful. And to say that if we don't go full T&I, those resources aren't available, I think we've proven is completely false. Anybody who's willing to pay for them can have the resources. And even if we took out certain modules, the training is still there. You just don't apply those modules. So to say that we won't have access to it if we don't do full T&I is false. Everything is there if you're willing to pay for it. And that's where I think I like the fact, and I really want us to move forward and stand behind the fact that we will provide this training, the templates, for free to the labs that are having to go through this. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions? Mr. Borcha, followed by Mr. Waymeyer, followed by Jennifer Harrington from Vallejo Sanitation and Flood Control District.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and fellow board members. My name is Adam Borchard. I'm a regulatory advocate with the Association of California Water Agencies. ACWA thanks the State Water Board for holding today's public workshop on the expert review panel's report on the state's environmental laboratory accreditation program. We also appreciate the time and effort that the panel has put into the report to improve ELAP's effectiveness. ACWA and the California Municipal Utilities Association submitted written comments ahead of today's workshop. Generally, we agree with the spirit of the report and the report's recommendations. However, we do have 2 concerns. One is the development of a T&I standard, and the second is the third-party private sector assessor contracting. We are concerned that these 2 recommendations will have cost implications, particularly on smaller laboratories throughout the state. I will say, after hearing today's presentations by Ms. Sotelo and her team, we find it very reassuring that they are aware of our members' concerns and that they are going to be holding workshops this summer. We look forward to assisting State Water Board staff to address our concerns, and got a few more comments. We appreciate the State Water Board staff to engage stakeholders in the water community on all aspects of ELAP, not just the structure of the program, but fees as well. And we look forward to continuing to assist in whatever way we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. Waymeyer, followed by Ms. Harrington, followed by William Ray from William Ray Consulting. Oh, what a great card.
Good morning, directors. Guess I've still got 3 minutes for it to be morning.
That's right.
Fred Waymeyer, Treated Water Superintendent, Nevada Irrigation District, Grass Valley, California. California brags about leading the nation in environmental programs, and rightly so. And here, NELAC Institute itself has identified 58 problems with the TNI. If California is a leader, let's put ourselves ahead and not behind with the compulsory implementation of the TNI standard. It sounds like that ELAP is overburdened and just looking for an off-the-shelf solution. I just don't want labs to be punished well, this might be a little harsh, for the shortcomings of ELAP, whether funding or staff. As was pointed out earlier, California started out ahead of the country.
In 1923.
What's that?
In 1923.
Well, right, but we're usually ahead of the country on everything anyway, environmentally. I think you'd agree with that. And you know, let's have the insight to, you know, at least modify the TNI. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Harrington, followed by Mr. Ray, followed by Andy Eaton from Eurofins.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Vallejo Sanitation and Flood Control District has an in-house laboratory, and we are only certified to perform wastewater testing. We have 4 full-time laboratory staff. I came up with sort of a narrowly focused statement today. Ms. Sotela's presentation, the timeline of implementation, that's a tough word.
Yep.
Yeah. So that thing she said, that seems reasonable. If that's what ends up being adopted. And I had initially come very ready to oppose the implementation process. I like the idea of phasing in. I like the idea of having some test inspections and things like that. What I'm really concerned about right now are the proposed transitional period where a lab can opt to have a third-party assessor. And my question is really focused around what standard would they be assessing to? Are they assessing to TNI, these third-party? Because we're talking very early if this is available now to catch up on ELAP's backlog, what standard do they assess to? ELAP's current standard or full TNI? And knowing what standard my lab is going to be assessed against is going to influence my decision whether or not I'm going to utilize a third-party assessor.
Right.
And I'd really like to see that question addressed and at least answered in some form, and I will be able to make a decision fully informed and with full confidence. Thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Well, I thought you were throwing that into the mix, right, for the proposal.
It just seems to me that it defies logic to apply a standard that hasn't been adopted. So the answer to the question is the current standard. Right.
Hello, I'm William Ray of William Ray Consulting. Unfortunately, I didn't bring any props like I did last time. I'm just going to talk. Also, I would like to let you know that I have 5 more years experience than Allison McKenzie has, so I must obviously know more. I also have as clients small laboratories who are attempting to try to become TNI compliant in many facts. These are small labs like 2 persons. They're also the small part-time labs, which would also be included in this standard. I'd like to let you know what you're getting as you kick the tires of this thing. This was a program designed by large commercial labs, primarily involved in the EPA's contract lab program. That's their model. That was their design. You can tell in that they even have all functions of the laboratory, not only the building and the equipment and the analyst, but the HR and the accounting and even the management, all inclusive. They do not have any experience with any of these being separate and out of the control of the laboratory. Just to give you a great example, it was mentioned earlier that we're looking at qualifications for lab director and modifying those. I can tell you right now, you don't have to worry about that. The standard does not have a qualification for the lab director. All the qualifications are on a group of people called technical managers. And at this point, I can tell you my 44 years experience and my master's degree in chemistry will not qualify me to do anything related to microbiology as a technical manager. So you will have to fix that. Where labs get, scared in these things is the standards are written to require the lab to consider how to implement the standard. The problem is if the standard's not applicable, then you have to write up something that says the standard's not applicable. You just can't say, well, it's not applicable and walk away from it. You actually have to consider it. What is it about the standard that you don't have to comply with? The standards also were written with high-end chemistry in mind. They did not include the simple test. There is no separate module for physical properties, including pH, suspended solids,
the demands, BOD, COD, and so forth. The lab has to go into Module 1 and Module 4 and figure out what does not apply. And in some cases, that's not practical. As I brought a BOD bottle last time, labs will not be exempt from having to test the volume of that bottle. The problem is there's no standard. So what would the lab do? Well, I'm going to set a standard that no bottle fails. In essence, what's the deal? So I can do that because the standard says it's my decision on how to do it. That's where labs are also afraid, because in the past, ELAP has told them how to comply. They have gone in and said, you must do this, you must do this, you must do this. So that's where they're worried, is now they're wondering if ELAP's going to do the same thing. I think that's an important issue here as well. On the last issue, the only thing I have agreed so far is the need for third-party assessors. As a person with 44 years experience, especially auditing wastewater laboratories, I can tell you that I am faster, better, and in many ways cheaper. So, and if you want to look at it, I actually have done some spreadsheet work on that for myself.
And you have the best card.
Huh?
And you have the best card.
I have to thank my daughter, the graphic artist, for that card.
Really good. Really good.
I'm going to have to put the beard on now.
Well, no, that's what I was doing. And your hair looks like you put your finger in a socket.
I did.
Otherwise.
Sort of.
But it's cute. It's
Yeah.
Einsteinish.
It is.
Yeah,
And
I
it was
like
free.
it. I really like it.
Thank you.
There may be a run on your business cards now, but
Yeah, I just want to bring up one thing. It was mentioned that Oregon provides this. Texas also exempts laboratories based upon exempting certain tests. Virginia runs a T&I light for small laboratories. When the subject of the part-time single-person, operator-run laboratory was brought up at T&I meetings, many people there with ABs were like, why are you dealing with them? And I says, because state law requires they be certified, even for the littlest of things. And they said, oh, we did it another way. So in many cases, that problem's been handled by the states, and they don't necessarily bring it up. So a lot of the small labs that are usually seen are 2-person, 3-person, full-time labs, not an operator who shows up for 2 hours, once a day to run a pH and a DO and call it a quits. So that's your small lab.
thank you. Helpful. Mr. Eaton, followed by Josie Tellers from Davis.
Thank you all for the opportunity to speak.
Oh, thanks
I'm
for coming.
wearing 3 hats today. Technical Director of Eurofins Eaton Analytical, which operates 2 large laboratories and 3 very small labs. Chair of LTAC and also member of the Joint Editorial Board of Standard Methods for the Examination of Water and Wastewater. So I'm looking at it from all kinds of different directions. Most of my comments, however, will be as Eurofins Eaton Analytical. First off, I want to strongly support Christine's plan to move forward with T&I with only the 2 modifications. Anything else in terms of taking the other 58 and making the modifications to the standard just makes it extremely cumbersome, complicated, and very difficult in terms of training support. Second thing, speaking now as LTAC, we had talked extensively over the last year as Christine moved towards T&I or T&I Lite of an implementation time frame that was more like 3 years as opposed to 6 years. When I heard 6 years today, that got me very disturbed, because I can see cases where a laboratory that is doing something egregious could push back on ELAP and say, well, we have 6 years to implement the full standard. So even though we're doing something that we really should be decertified for right now, you can't do that to us. So I think it'll be critical in writing the standard to be sure that that part is clear, that ELAP still has that authority. And the last comment is, as several people have noted, a lot of large labs in particular are already following the T&I standard. the challenge really is for the small labs, and more particularly, as you've heard today, the small non-commercial labs. So I would also strongly support Bruce Godfrey's comment to have a two-tier implementation time frame where commercial laboratories have to implement the standard much more quickly, whether they're small or large, than small non-commercial labs. And the last comment, just because it's come up periodically in terms of costs, is the TNI standard costs approximately $75. Putting on my standard methods hat, we charge about $200 for that book, and we require everybody to buy it if they're going to be using it. So the TNI standard is cheap by comparison, and we are not going to drop our price. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Tellers?
Good morning, Chair Marcus and board members.
Morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Josie Tellers. I'm from City of Davis, Water Quality Coordinator for City of Davis, but I also represent Civic Lab Committees, CWA State Lab Committee. I had the opportunity since 1983 to work for a large commercial lab, and for the last 15 or so years for City of Davis. I have a script that I brought with me today, but I slowly but surely crossing them off because the topics have been discussed already, so I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm just going to go with things that are not covered. So here we go. State of California is unique and special, and yet should be flexible to not only lead but follow. Other states already have done TNI, adoption of TNI. Some states did not. We should learn from the lessons that they have had. We don't have to reinvent the wheels. Examples of other states were already mentioned here: state of Oregon, state of Texas, state of Virginia. So we should consider reviewing how they came up with that solutions, and perhaps California will learn from it. Data quality, integrity, and defensibility can be achieved with practical and reasonable approach. Currently, wastewater labs are already heavily regulated through the NPDES program, 40 CFR Part 136, that also cover quality control and requirements that are pertaining to the laboratories. In addition to that, permit requirements also emphasize additional requirements that's specific to the laboratories. We also participate in the annual GMRQA, which is similar to 1 PT a year. If we have field samplings that we need to do and we have to report for compliance reporting, we also need to show that we have a quality assurance manual and SOP for those. So these are all pretty much covered. And in addition to the ELAB current standards. We are not afraid of the challenge. We just want to be successful to go about it. The standard that we're going to select has to be sustainable, technically and economically feasible. The resources that we haven't touched really is the big cost is the manpower. We're talking about $100,000, $200,000 a year to add additional staffing. So the fee cost and the material for TNI is small compared to adding staff to the resources in order to be TNI compliant. Sorry. Lastly, for CWEA, there was a question by member Stephen Moore about what CWA wants as far as the technical manager. Currently, the recommendation language in the ERP report is very weak on how to modify and implement that particular modification. What we would really want is to the full adoption of Article 9 under, let's see, sorry.
That's all right.
I have many pages.
Well, now you're answering my question, so just relax. You got all the time in the world.
All right, so for CWEA, we would like to, for your consideration, the full adoption, implementation and adoption of the current regulatory requirements for laboratory personnel under Title 22, Division 4, Chapter 19, Article 9. I think that will answer all your
I
questions.
remember reading that in the comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a couple, can we bring back, hi, Laura, and is Steve still here? There you are, hiding behind Tom. Can you guys come back with Christine and Darren and Kim? And then if we have any questions for you or feedback to give, we can do it. I have a few questions, but I'll defer to my colleagues first because they may ask them. No? All right, let me just ask a few. I mean, I know we're not at a decision hearing here, and we'll take it. I mean, the good thing about a workshop is you can just listen and take it in and then think about it. I have my little notes. I'll marinate on it and then can meet with staff. But there are just a couple of things that came up that I wanted some clarification from you all on your thinking, and then specification about the LTAC thinking, where the actual, is the opinion yours? Is it LTAC's? How was it discussed? One of the issues that got raised was the places that may bifurcate and say, if you're doing simple tests, and again, I'm just quoting what people say. I've used those tests. I haven't actually done them myself, obviously. I've had a lab, but it was big lab. Things like total suspended stallage, pH, and stuff like that. The things that could be the unintended consequences of it. Did you talk or think about bifurcating how you would handle those issues? Any of you, actually? But I want to first start on where the degree of the conversation at the expert panel.
So I'm not aware of any of the states that participate in the TNI program that exempt.
Okay.
Someone.
So they don't exempt
So they
them.
don't exempt them. What I would say, and I tried to make a note of the states that were mentioned, New York and Florida require everybody, regardless.
Well, there was the other point about only 3 of the 13.
Illinois,
so.
Oregon, and Texas, they make it voluntary if you're not accepting commercial samples. If you're accepting a commercial sample for any purpose,
Right.
even a quick turnaround test or whatever, you must be accredited. And then New Jersey, Virginia, and Pennsylvania actually run 2-tiered programs, and they have relaxed standards for wastewater laboratories that are just slightly different, but they don't exempt anybody. So,
all right.
I hope.
So there was one clarifying point I think I wanted to make too that I didn't hear mentioned in regard kind of to that question, and that's, there is a difference between a lab being required to be ELAP certified to submit regulatory compliance and then operating a lab for operational purposes only and not doing regulatory compliance. And I didn't hear a separation of theirs. Certainly, if they wanted to operate a lab for process control that was not going to do regulatory compliance sampling, there would be no ELAB certification requirement in that instance. They would be in charge of their own lab. They could run it how they wanted, follow whatever standards they believe necessary. It's when you then step it to the next level where the samples are going to be submitted in a regulatory compliance fashion. Certainly, that's when we require ELAB certification.
Right, and what I heard it took a while, but through the course of the many people who came at different facets of that, was that this unintended consequence is that economically, if an entity, say in my old case, it'd be the city of LA, to try and do two, well, we were big, so assume we were small. You're trying to do 2 things. Why would you have, if you're going to send it out, why still keep your lab and the expense of that just 2? So just to be able to do those quick turnarounds that you need. But what I thought I heard people then saying, it wasn't an all or nothing, but the question was whether those more simple tests actually required the level of precision QA documentation, whatever you want to call the package that takes you into TNI territory from whatever we have now, was potentially overkill on those tests. So you could have a lab that, as at least one and maybe more talked about, where they do the simple tests in-house, and that works for them for both regulatory and the quick turnaround, but they send out anything more complicated. And I just don't understand or know enough about the science and practice to know whether that's a reasonable thing or not, or whether other states have done that or not.
I think that you would discover that a quality management plan is tailored to your organization. And so if you're not a complicated organization, your quality management plan is going to be less complex.
Because you would go through TNI and be able to write, well, we don't need that, we don't need that. But you would have to, as someone said, you'd have to consider it and say, we don't do that. But that doesn't seem that onerous.
Yeah.
So,
And what I would say to you, even, and I think it's on the website, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the expert panel actually in their first year of assessment of ELAP's program actually had a few small laboratories give testimony to their experience for going through this process. And I don't know if that was recorded or put on our website, but I think it is on our website. And you know, the people that gave those examples, I mean, one thing that one of the ladies says repeatedly, and I've heard her speak many times, is she finally could sleep at night. You know, she finally realized, you know, gosh, there was a lot of things that could have gone wrong. She could have gotten in a lot of trouble. She could have been taken to court. She could have had a lot of issues without having documentation in place that this process made her aware should even be there, and that she didn't have there before. And not only has, I mean, in her example in itself, not only has this helped her sleep at night, she's actually been able to expand. So it is not necessarily a story of demise. It can actually be of true success in somebody being able to go beyond where they were before.
So Chair Marcus, you started by asking, did the panel talk about this issue? And the answer is extensively. And I think there were two main things that came out of that discussion. Thought number one is that developing the quality management systems for small labs is important, because if anything, the small labs are typically one person, maybe not doing it full time, not having the level of expertise and education that some of the larger labs have. And when there's turnover, there's a need for documentation of how you do things, so the new person who comes in knows how to do it in the same way and provides repeatable data over time. So the thought process is the need for a quality system is there. On the contrast, however, they were very sensitive to all the issues that were being talked about. And I think the key word is scalable. The panel believes, based upon the presentations that they heard, based upon their own experience, that it is scalable. There are a lot of the things that are, you can talk about them as being incomplete, or you can talk about them being flexible. But the thought process is that a lot of the requirements are things you can simply write out as that does not apply to this laboratory. And I think the key in all this discussion comes down to an offer that I heard Christine make today, which is she wants to, for those labs that do really simple things, TSS, pH would be a perfect example, and that's really all they do, that she's offering to have a one-day session where they use training in the morning and essentially giving them documents in the afternoon that they fill out with them, so that when they walk out that day, they're 90%, 100% complete with the documentation requirements. That in the sense they're doing a bunch of the work to help those labs scale this to them. If I can't say whether that's going to happen. There are other people who can, who've maybe been through this. Certainly Laura can. But I think that's the key, because if they can do that, then the level of onerousness that you're talking about for the larger labs that have lots of LDTs may not be there. It's the scalability. Is that truly going to happen? And is Christine going to be able to provide the level of support to make it scalable for them? I think Stephen Clark hit it right on the nose. If they can walk in and provide, particularly for those simple tests, for those simple laboratories, the templates that are largely filled out, and then walk them through and explain to them how they're doing these things, how they should be doing these things, and then customize them in that one day, then a lot of that burden goes away. If they can't achieve that, and as Stephen Clark said, they all need to go off and do it on their own, then I think you will have the kind of nightmare concerns. And I think that's exactly what the panel talked about, is make it scalable, give them the assistance.
How did you feel about the 6-year time frame?
We did not. That was from Christine.
No, how did you feel about them proposing a 6-year time frame?
I thought it was long.
Feels long to me, but
I thought it was
we'll
long.
have to be talking about.
We heard about Virginia, or Oregon, I guess maybe has water, but not wastewater, or whatever the examples were. But really, based on that discussion, I was going to ask staff, is that something we consider? And I guess we would, but sounds to me like I'm hearing a pathway through more or less, quote unquote, full TNI implementation that functionally creates what would be perceived as sort of an exemption. That is, that a lot of requirements that look on the face of it as being onerous actually can be handled quite efficaciously with some assistance from staff, and that appears to be the vision that you're bringing forward.
Correct. So if you remember the 3 strategy implementation assistants, so they wouldn't be held to the standard until 5 years from now, which would give them time to learn, and they're not held to it. Therefore,
But they're held to the current standard.
correct.
And
There
is
would be
it-
a floor.
Does it also embody this concept of a 2-tier implementation that was that Dr. Godfrey mentioned? I mean,
I think it does. It does have that spirit and embodies the fact that they wouldn't be held to the standard. They would have that time to learn, spend a day with us, walk out the door with the tools that they need to succeed.
Remind me why 6 years? I mean, I like all the assistance, obviously. I like trying to do templates. I like figuring out how to tailor it to the circumstance. I like the idea of being able to take a national standard, but also help the smallers. But I don't, again, I know I've asked you this before, but I don't remember why 6 years rather than 3. That seems like a long time when you think about, I mean, again, not that, I mean, the question is, what ball is your eye on? And my eye is on credibility in the data with a structure, institutional structure that gives anybody confidence that the data that we're getting, that we're relying on for compliance is good. And that you always need something like that. It's not, trust me, it's nothing personal. I appreciate folks coming forward today and not taking it all as personally as our last workshop. This was much better and more focused than that first one, although I understand that is a common reframe. It's about how do we get to something where anyone can have confidence, or a new person can walk in and you have confidence in the data, especially since our whole compliance system relies on the data that's provided by dischargers and regulated entity. There's a higher burden on the data being tested by folks we can trust, and us being really tough cops on the beat, which is going to, I appreciate all the work you've done, is going to take a while. But why 6 years?
Sure, I think really it's the collaborative spirit that we value from the community, and that we're listening, and that they need the time. And so that's what they've requested of us. I do want to mention that we have interviewed other states and small laboratories in other states, and they can do it in the time that Laura has mentioned, probably in a year or 2. But it's a matter of getting all of the tools in place for them to be successful. So that's
But
why
we may need the time to help develop the tools to help them adequately.
But if we can make it happen faster, if you like, it is doable. But we want to keep intact our community that we've worked so hard to build, and the relationship that we have with them.
Understanding that it might be a year before standards are adopted and brought before this board, can you help me get a sense of what can be done prior to necessarily adoption of those standards insofar as developing those templates and doing that work? Or does it require us to actually formally adopt it here before you guys can really get a lot of that work done?
Get the tools done and the assistance done.
Yeah, or just what you can get done in absence of a formal adoption of the standard as well. And yeah.
We can jumpstart the outreach and education. We have the training contract that you all approved. It includes TNI trainings, 2 in California, Northern and Southern California. So we can jumpstart those things. The standard doesn't have to be adopted to help the labs.
So part of our purpose of presenting this to you today, other than to, have the final expert panel and then the staff's recommendation, is to get the board's sense, because if we would like to start down the path and believe that, obviously it needs to go through a public process and it could change in that public process, but before we start on that, does the board want us to begin ahead of that schedule and in that guise preparing to go down that path? So, that's kind of just a question to the board members today, but fully recognizing though that, I don't want to do what you're kind of in chiming, board member Escobar, is that, well, we're going to write the regs and we're going to sit back and wait and then see if they get adopted, and then we jumpstart at that point, because then that just makes it an even longer time frame. So having this conversation now allows us to try to overlap a lot of that, but fully caveat that it needs to go through the process and it could change.
I like that idea. I also want to just follow up on the issue of, maybe piloting, whether that is through an existing agency lab, a state agency that's already using ELAP, or seeing if there's a lab that would be willing to work with you to just do a dry run and see, how that would play out. I'm going by on a second suggestion here, something that we would do often at the Air Resources Board. A lot of times we'd have a regulatory package and we'd hear from stakeholders that the regulation was going to put them out of business. And we would ask for volunteers, labs to come forward to share their books with us and do an analysis on how a program could affect them. Now, obviously, if we're talking about labs that are on the edge economically anyway, those are probably, not necessarily the ones that we'd be wanting to look at, but those that say they currently have a good business model and that this would be challenging for them, I think it'd be helpful. The reason I was asking about, how much would it cost to do an independent accreditation, and currently what are the fees, just to put it in better context. And so I think if you were able to work with the lab and get more information about their business model, that might help you to better assess this economic issue.
So on your first one, we will definitely approach the different state labs about that. We've talked to them a little bit about it already, and of course their answer is, well, it costs more, and so we have to do the state budgetary process, so we'll see you, after we get approval for that. Kind of airing a little bit of ongoing negotiation. Obviously, we contract with the California Department of Public Health for lab support for our drinking water program, and I have currently asked them to be TNI standard, and I got told no. So we will see where that ends, but I may be hiring an outside lab, just to be quite honest, because if we're pushing ELAP and TNI as a standard, then our lab is going to comply with that as well. But that's an ongoing negotiation at the moment. But so we'll look and see if we can't get some factor to have them try to help us through it and see how it does apply there. Looking at the small labs, I think I would maybe even add in a wastewater treatment plant lab. I think that's where we heard a lot of the folks from the small labs that have an issue. As I thought it through, I've kind of had the same thought before as well. I think I would caveat that no question it's going to cost them a little bit more. We're gonna raise them to a standard of care that, and certainly respect for everybody in this room, because I'm sure everybody in this room that came cared about it, and they're not the ones I'm particularly worried about, but there are those labs out there that, in my experience of being a wastewater enforcement inspector, didn't give it the adequate amount of care. And I think that setting a bar that raises their cost is appropriate. They needed to be at a higher cost so that they were adequately, performing their duties. And so it's that balance between that. Now, is there a study we could do to find whether there's a break point of whether it makes sense to form or not? I guess we could look at that and see, are we in some essence then saying at a certain size, it just doesn't make sense anymore to have a lab at a small water agency, and we could work with maybe Civiqua or someone like that to see if something like that pencils out. But that does factor in a little bit there.
Yeah,
would like to
mean,
add
this
that-
is an issue I've brought up before. I think I wish that we had a little bit more of a robust analysis, economic analysis. And I don't know if we have anyone on staff that could help on this, or maybe approaching other agencies, maybe seeing how involved is it when ARB does these analyses. I wasn't involved at any level of detail. And the other point that I failed to bring up is that I understand that if these third-party companies are not, currently in place in California, but if you build it, they will come. And so, just looking at other states where they do have a program where they utilize third-party contractors to get a better sense of the cost, because certainly if we're having companies come in from out of state, that's going to be quite costly. But I would imagine that there's enough labs that it would make it attractive for people to set up shop here in California.
So I do want to mention something about the draft regulations. That will include an economic analysis. So you'll be able to see that when you see the regulations come to you in 2018.
And based on the testimony we received on this cost question, I was imagining a graph and an initial activation energy, an activation cost, and then a flattening, but that might be a little higher, but hopefully not too much, over time.
I think we're required to look at like the economic impact over the first 3 years of implementation. So you'll see that where the cost, the initial startup costs, and then, the flattening out. So that's part of, in part, what takes along with the regulatory package is putting all that information together.
And what I also heard was in your presentations and responses that, and then the testimony we had about the concern about labs closing, small labs, or just going to process control. Really, the intent that you've indicated, it sounds like, is to try to dampen that initial cost, so that folks aren't taking on all of those costs, to get up to speed on their own. So for those folks making budgetary decisions for laboratories, we should send a strong signal that it's our intent to significantly dampen those initial costs through our efforts to create templates, to get staff on site, to do those walkthroughs, those one-day trainings, so that folks aren't learning things on their own to get up to speed on a TNI type approach.
And I do think that to the extent that you would just want to see what some of those costs look like, even for states that may not have provided those types of templates and things like that some of those exist. So I'm sure we could get you some of those examples.
Well, if you want feedback, I think you should proceed. But I think this whole discussion about options for making it easier without throwing requirements out the window is the direction you want to go. That seems logical to me. 6 years still seems like a lot of time, so I'm open to other things that would make it helpful. So I think there are things you need in the regs, but there are things you're going to need to ask us for, and we're obviously going to have to figure out in order to make it as easy as possible for folks. And considering any of these, not two tiers is overly simplistic, but spend a little more time thinking about that. I do see the value of having small labs, particularly at public agencies, but my highest priority is that the integrity of the system as a whole works, and right now I don't feel like it has it, and I'm scared to death about it. So I appreciate you trying to up our game on that, and everybody's game, but figuring out how to make it as workable as possible. I mean, the ball is improving the quality of our system.
Yeah, and, and understanding that, one of the top recommendations at this point is an immediate adoption of a standard, and recognizing that we can't immediately move because of procedures that we simply have to follow. Being able to act as if, for all intents and purposes, we have, especially on the training side, on the areas that will help with smaller laboratories and others to comply through templates and guidance, wherever it is. Beginning that work now, I think, is really prudent, instead of waiting a year.
Yeah, good. You know, remembering the workshop from October, as you mentioned, and the discussions there, you know, just repeat that we on the water board recognize the value of small labs. Staff recognizes that, and all the benefits. I've worked, you know, in 2012, I was in one of your small labs working with a staff person, a one-person lab. So I know, you know, and we know and understand that value. So we're listening. But also, we want you to listen to us in the expert panel and how we're doing our best to accommodate that vital function we have in our state. And so let's continue to work together and use the LTAC process and, you know that we are listening and everyone have respect for that going forward to meet those critical goals that the chair just laid out. Thank you.
Well, good. With that, I think we'll move on to the next agenda item. Is that right? Thank you all for your time. Thank you for your time here and a couple years or more. Thanks for everything. All right. Thank you all for coming. Oh, you are? So you want us to do our closed session right before our next closed session? Okay. All right. We have board member reports still on the agenda if folks would like to do that. Is there anything pressing that folks would like to report from their board report, or they want to save it, or it's up to you? All right. Why don't we save it till the next meeting, so we'll be looking at a month's worth of stuff and making choices among them. Mr. Lawfer, I know we're going to adjourn to closed session, but Board Member Dodek had to go, so at 2 o'clock?
I was going to propose that the board recess and then convene in closed session at 2 o'clock for the personnel item. And just to clarify, I believe that there was a closed session notice for WaterFix, and there will not be any closed session held on WaterFix at this board meeting.
Thank you.